conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left, this is about right and wrong.
It's so secret we can't talk.
Our security is at stake.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Ashton. Today I am talking to Ashton Forbes, a online journalist, citizen investigator who has really made a name for himself investigating the missing flight from 10 years ago, which we will talk about extensively tonight. But in doing so, Ashton, you have developed an extensive understanding not only of the current space of like UFO, UAP disclosure, but also of the technology behind these phenomenon and the technology that may or may not be possessed by the government and every other rabbit hole along the way. So welcome, and I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you too, Ian. I think we've crossed paths a couple times informally, but this is our first time talking, face to face over some long form content, and I'm really looking forward to it, man.
Yeah. So what we're going to do tonight, Ashton and I have been talking a little bit building into this. We have a whole bunch of evidence, clips, documents to go through, and we're going to present it all live and kind of break it down together. Ashton's going to explain a bit of his journey of disclosure around MH370, and we're also going to talk about the implications of all of the other sort of tangential but evidenceable pieces of the current state of UAP disclosure. And hopefully by the end of this, both he and I will be walking away, as well as anyone viewing this will walk away with sort of an understanding of the current state of what is evidenceable and not necessarily certain, but at least worth considering as a possible state of the world today. Because I think that anyone viewing this, anyone who's done any amount of research or digging for themselves, realizes that we are going through a serious paradigm shift as to the nature of our reality, the nature of what is and is not true, and aliens and all related phenomenon are just one small part of it. They might not even be aliens anymore, right? We'll talk about that a fair bit, but we're going to start with a clip that was recently on the Joe Rogan Experience, where Tucker Carlson brought up the Kona Blue documents, which Ashton actually brought to my attention a little bit before this podcast episode aired. And I think we're actually going to start here.
No, I got it right
with
right
Tucker
here.
just being
I don't do email.
a hermit crab.
You don't do email?
No. I haven't done email in many years.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you exist?
I do text.
Wow. Just text?
Yeah, I don't do email. I don't go on the fucking internet. I don't have a TV. I'm not into that.
I just wanted to,
but anyway,
to highlight that for a second.
No, that stuff is bad,
Yeah, I guess.
One in the U.S. government who's well, look. Let me just start by saying I don't know anything. But he sent me this. The above is 100% legit. I was read into this program, but told never to tell anyone. It's now been released. As you can see, it began as a result of my old program, AATIP.
So what he is referring to there is the Kona Blue documents. Ashton, how did you come across these documents?
Yeah, so these documents got declassified seemingly by AARO, which is the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. This is essentially the office that was set up to investigate UFOs, if you want to think of it like that. I've actually reported my case to them as well. So this document, if you look through the dates, it looks like it was declassified back in like February, but now it's just hit the public realm. And when you dig through it, there's some pretty crazy claims in there in terms of what they've been researching. This document seems to go back to 2008 from me looking through it. Tucker Carlson seems to be referencing Lou Elizondo in those texts right there. Lou Elizondo is, a UFO community celebrity, so to speak. And he supposedly ran ATIP. That was the program that was mentioned, AATIP. It was something that the Senator Harry Reid, I believe, had helped to organize. I may be having all the details, some of these details wrong, but that's the rough strokes of it. And there's been a lot of controversy around whether or not this program existed, the ATIP program, and whether or not he was really the head of it. Personally, I believe that he was, but I'm not really 100% sure on that. But this gives some people some context for like who Tucker's talking to there and, why this document's potentially important.
Yeah. So just so anyone viewing this can understand, what we are looking at right now is my own note-taking software, breaking down the document. Anything highlighted in purple, like this right here, is my personal notes. And then all of these are screenshots, page by page, of the documents themselves. I'll put a link down below when we publish these videos for people to find these documents in their full form for themselves. But like you said, Ashton, this comes out of the Department of Homeland Security, correct? And it was elaborate on this for us a little bit. They were looking for SAP clearance, special access program clearance, and it was apparently denied. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Well, so I don't know too much about all the details of what was the nature of getting this declassified, but definitely when this is supposedly a special access program, so SAPs, that's something people should know if they want to know about the UFO phenomenon at all. The idea there is that there's private organizations that are affiliated with the government, and they set up these programs. Usually, it's like defense contractors and things like that that will then research, advanced technologies and stuff that borderlines on the esoteric, as some of the content in here does. And this is
Borderline
where,
esoteric is a good description for
yeah,
it.
because remote viewing and stuff like that. I even struggle with a lot of these concepts. I'm more on like the hard sciences side of it. But this is the stuff where these are like your congressmen and stuff don't have access to this information. I don't know if people realize that, but actually, congressmen aren't even required to have security clearances. And just because you have a security clearance doesn't mean you get access to special access programs. There's like classified. I think I forget the lowest level, which is kind of a non-important one, but there's secret and then top secret. So secret and then TS, and then there's TSSCI, which and then there's compartmentalized. I think the TSSCI is compartmentalized information.
Yeah.
And so it's like this is the level. It's at that level or potentially even like higher to have this type of compartmentalized access. And this is the reason why very few people know what's going on, because we have compartmentalized the information so highly that one individual here or there doesn't really have a full picture of everything. And that's by design. So it protects national security, but it also makes it so that we've gotten ourselves in such a problem now where these private companies have so much information and so much advanced technology that we can't get it out of there. And then people don't know what can be real or not. And I have it on good authority that some of the engineers that work in some of these labs, they worry that the information can't even get out, that people don't even know what's possible and what's real out there. So that's why we're seeing this push for disclosure, and potentially why this document got declassified is it's kind of a situation where we're trying to wake people up to go, we have some stuff out there that's pretty wild and it's going to break people's minds.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of the people in the government that are pushing for disclosure are people that are not read in. And because by the nature of it, a lot of the people that are read in are kind of in the club, and the people that are not read in have a lot of authority and power within the government. But because they're not, quote unquote, in the club, it sort of incentivizes them to be like, why are we doing this to our world? Because as I think everyone's about to see, and as you have extensively demonstrated through your research, these are technologies that will fundamentally change human nature, our whole species, our whole planet.
Well, that's why I'd like to have this conversation too, because I think that a lot of the people in Congress and what have you, they also don't really know. If you listen to a lot of the press conferences or the little press releases they do with people, it's like they're trying to figure out what's the nature of what's going on. Like, what are we hiding exactly out there? So it makes it very difficult for us to, secondhand to try to figure out what's going on here. So hopefully tonight, what we do together here, I think will help give people a good framework for what is the nature of all of this UFO phenomenon.
Yeah. I'm hovering right now on the page where they talk about the budget for this program, and it immediately makes it pretty apparent that this is probably not even close to the entire reverse engineering programs. It's probably just a small piece of it that was probably put together by some people that were partially read in on some of the programs. But also, as it shows later in these documents that we'll briefly scan through, it clearly identifies that there are caches of technology in private contractor hands, in other special access programs, and all sorts of little holes scuttled away all around the world, probably. And part of this document is talking about how they need to collect all that information, right, and get it into a centralized place rather than being hidden in all these little siloed secret bubbles where who knows what is being done with it.
This is a drop in the bucket right here.
Exactly,
I mean, that's
because
a lot of money. Yeah.
Fiscal year 2012, that's 12 million. Fiscal year 2013, 25 million, and then 35 to 50 million in 2014. And then it was discontinued, and it didn't actually go through these years because, it was discontinued, right? What's your speculation, Ashton? Do you think that they denied the SAP clearance for it and then just scuttled it away into a different hole? Do you think they shut this whole program down so it wouldn't get disclosed to these people? What do you think?
I think there's probably dozens, if not hundreds, of programs just like this that are currently out there. So the fact that this one got shut down doesn't necessarily mean much of anything to me. I think that this goes to show that they are looking into some of this stuff. And this is, I think that if you were to add up all these special access programs, it'd probably blow people's minds at how many there are out there, and they all have different purposes. Some are probably more focused. This one seems to be more general in terms of just understanding the landscape for some of these advanced technologies that are out there. And it also seems like they weren't necessarily like producing something specific. They, in terms of like something mechanical, they were producing like reports about, what is the nature of it? How can we get a strategic advantage over our adversaries, stuff like that.
Yeah, like this right here. So these are the pages where they're talking about the broad overview of the program, and a little later they'll go into more detail. But things like analyze recovered technology in collaboration with major aerospace and electronics companies, and that tells us two things: A, that there is recovered technology. You don't say that about human technology. And major aerospace and electronics companies indicates that the private sector is heavily involved in this. And we'll talk more about people like Lockheed Martin and maybe Raytheon later on. Then they break it down into the four centers, which is where we get to some of this juicy stuff that is like, Ashton, you focus more on the actual like hard science and the technical physics of what's going on with these crafts and these programs. This document goes into this whole other direction with this consciousness center that says, quote, expand on remote viewing and remote communication to communicate, retrieve data, and transport across dimensional / space-time barrier. And we will get into some documents later on that Ashton sent me that goes much more in depth about the potential involvement of a dimensional and space-time barrier in the actual hard physics of how things like these warp drives or, propulsion systems might work. It's also worth noting that in the medical center, they talk about studying the physiological and psychological effects of interaction with vehicles and anomalous phenomena.
That part right there, too, with the justification for need on question number 2 right there. Yeah, you might want to read that one as well.
Great idea. Justification for need, quote, remote vision, remote communication, and D/rematerialization techniques to observe, communicate, retrieve data, and transfer matter across dimensional and space-time barriers will undoubtedly be of an utmost interest, if not a top collection priority for any adversarial intelligence and security services. Keywords: transfer of matter across dimensional and space-time barriers. So are we talking about time travel potentially?
That's definitely a question for sure. Time dilation would tell us we can move forward to the future the faster we go towards the speed of light. Now, traveling to the past is something I still trying to wrap my brain around. But, for laymen who are sitting here listening and watching this that don't really deal with this topic very much, they may look at that and go, oh, this is just, magic, what have you out there. But from what I've been researching, it's more true than it's not true. Let's put it at that.
Yeah, and we have some videos that we will be playing here in just a little bit to show the magic in real time. I'm just going to briefly scroll us down to where they go into more detail, specifically about the Advanced Technology Center. This is where we can infer from the wording in the document about the nature of where this technology is currently being housed and who is housing it and sort of who has jurisdiction over it. Quote, first, to gain access to and inventory all existing caches of advanced aerospace vehicle materials and documentation within CONUS, whether residing in archive storage, under active program investigation, national laboratories, government organizations, and or contractors being, to my mind, the key part of that. Do you see anything that I'm not highlighting there, Ashton?
So I just want to be careful because my job is somewhat related to the government, but a CONUS and CONUS are the military bases. And one of them is, so I don't know which is which, CONUS versus CONUS. One of them is international, and one of them is, I think, domestic, I believe. Mm-hmm. So that's what they're talking about here, is this idea that we may have some, I don't know, potentially crash retrievals or advanced technology, or I think the one question UFO community asks too is like, have we given this to the defense contractors, and who really has it? I'm not sure, but it's definitely interesting to think about.
Yeah, there's definitely, I want to get your take on some of the sort of primary advocates for disclosure, like Stephen Greer and David Grush a little later, because it's interesting how this document is one example of a newer piece of evidence, sort of backwards corroborates some of what those guys have been saying in the past.
Yeah.
Let's scroll down to where we get more details on the consciousness center. This is just important setup to sort of understand the nature of the technology that we're talking about and the sort of otherworldly nature of what reality might be actually all around us, because we've all been raised to believe that, space is three-dimensional and time is linear and Einstein was right and history is in a book. And all of that might not be the case anymore, because in the consciousness center, quote, manages the acquisition, training, and utilization of remote viewers and communicators. These unorthodox techniques may prove to be a critical collection methods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is worth noting for anyone who's watching this that you can look up the long history of the US government hiring remote viewers for up to 40, 50, 60, 70 years. It just always sounded like mumbo jumbo until you start to read it in documents and start to read that. I mean, Ashton, am I incorrect to be reading that these documents imply that the crafts that we're recovering are controlled by psychic interface? Probably.
I've seen that's how I inferred it as well. And just to be honest with the viewers, that's something that I've kind of struggled with. The whole remote viewing thing is something that I struggle with in general, but I try to keep an open mind to pretty much everything these days. But yeah, that's pretty much what they're talking about there.
I'm the same way, where like I kind of rely on evidence and facts and document and like things that I can prove. And remote viewing, there's extensive shall we say subjective evidence of it and extensive sort of soft evidence of it, but it's really hard for both of us, I think, to wrap our minds around. But the government seems highly interested in funding these projects and in hiring remote viewers to do this research.
Yeah, the CIA specifically, they've got a long history of it, so it's very interesting.
Yeah. Exactly. Another couple things in the Consciousness Center: study consciousness interactions with and control of technology. That's the part where we're inferring that it sounds like these spacecrafts are controlled by consciousness, at least in part, maybe. And I think that we'll get into a lot later. Ashton, you have a lot of speculation about how much of the sightings and the technology that we're seeing in the skies is actually non-human technology, and how much of it might actually just be reverse engineered human created technology. And it's highly likely that if those two categories of technology exist, it's very likely that they do not both operate in the same ways. It's very likely that we are not fully reconstructing all of the technology that we might be recovering, but rather approximating it. Do you agree on that assessment?
No, totally agree. Yeah. I mean, imagine like there's a civilization that's, let's just say, like 100,000 years more advanced than us. Their technology is going to just seem like magic to us. And if we start to reverse engineer, it's not like we're going to immediately be at their level. We would take some of that and approximate it and, build our way up towards that. So our version of it would be like a crude approximation of what they're capable of.
Yeah. In this medical center section here, I'd be curious if you have any insight that I'm missing, because they talk a lot about the apparent injuries that people are sustaining from interacting with these crafts, from being close to the crafts, maybe being close to other technology that might not be crafts specifically. But they seem to talk about, since to date, some evidence points to non-ionizing EM, electromagnetic radiation associated injuries. But it sounds like it's not necessarily actually electromagnetic radiation. It's just similar to that based upon what other people are saying in interviews. Do you have a sense of what's going on with the injuries that are happening?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is related. So that's kind of when we're talking about Havana syndrome. I think that Havana syndrome is potentially linked to this. And I think that you could see how if you're underneath a craft that is producing some type of electromagnetic effect that's causing it to float, that you wouldn't want to be too close to it. The same way if you go get like an X-ray or an MRI, you don't want to be standing next to the machine when it's going off. And you can imagine if we had reverse engineered that, like were we able to turn that into like a handheld weapon where we can, shoot it at somebody there? This seems to go back to something called scalar physics that Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bearden in the 80s was a big proponent of. And it seems to explain, first of all, that Tesla was right and that there is potentially an ether out there, which we can use phase conjugation to allow waves to longitudinally transmit either through the ether. And essentially that if we were to try to measure the electromagnetic signature just in front of us, we would get nothing, but that we can transmit energy to a distance and that this can cause these types of effects that we're reading right here, which I think is a pretty crazy or like, I don't know, cool, let's say, connection if true.
Yeah, it can be very cool and can be very sketchy as
Yes,
well.
dangerous.
That's the thing about all these technologies is that's I mean, nuclear power isn't even necessarily the best analogy because nuclear power is sort of so extremely evil and so like I mean not quite as like yeah, nuclear energy is great, but it's not quite the same whereas the technology we're talking about here has the potential to create like basically infinite unlimited free energy for the entire planet but also evil super weapons but there's just so much more possible benefit it would seem to me is that am I on
I think that's
track
a
there?
great point, is that people have to realize, like, with nuclear energy, which is generally considered pretty clean, you get nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So imagine if we get unlimited green energy, imagine what kind of weapons we can produce with that. And that's what I think this is all about, honestly, is this comes down to national security.
Yeah.
I think that the elites of the world look at this and they go, the peasants aren't ready for this. They will destroy themselves, or they're not worthy of this technology. But we can talk about that more later.
Although ironically, it's them starting all the wars and them ordering us all to our deaths. But I just
Exactly.
wanted to briefly pause in this section where they're talking about so they talk about having about starting like a focused targeted observation program because they talk about what are called like quote hotspots of lots of UAP activity. And so they have this education program where they want to start like educating a lot of sort of citizen viewers to be available to make sightings at higher quality than just, random people with phone cameras. And they talk about specific sites that they want to study more in depth because there's large amounts of UAP activity in those areas. And they try to redact what those sites are. A single 2-story building in Las Vegas, Nevada is available. And then here's the interesting one, a 480-acre research property in Utah with a 15-year history of intensive anomalous activity is owned by blank. The property's under 24/7 armed guard. But later on in the same document, they failed to redact the fact that the Bigelow Ranch in Utah is
Skinwalker Ranch.
exactly is a place of particular interest. So we'll talk a little bit about Bigelow and Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how like UFO lore, which I have not traced and followed very extensively. I think you're probably the same. Where before you got into everything about the flight and about like the technology, I think you probably hadn't either, right? But then you look backwards and you see all of the lore surrounding a thing like Skinwalker Ranch, and suddenly it's showing up in a government document as like a particular area of interest. Is kind of wild, in my opinion. And then at the end of the document, it has a bunch of sort of correspondences and letters about how it was rejected for SAP clearance for who knows what reason.
Yeah, there's one part in here. It says something about application engineering, and I can just read it. It says, associated exotic technologies likely involve extremely sophisticated concepts within the world of quantum mechanics, nuclear science, electromagnetic theory, gravitics, and thermodynamics. Given that all of these have the potential to be used with catastrophic effects by adversaries, an unusually high degree of operational security and read-on discretion is required. Now, I want to contextualize this a little bit for people. So, one at a time, quantum mechanics here, I believe what they're really talking about is like a unification theory of quantum mechanics and general relativity, the very small and the very large, where we see weird stuff happening on the very small level. We can potentially get those effects on the large level. Nuclear science, I think they're talking about low energy nuclear reactions, which is also known as cold fusion. Low energy nuclear reaction is more like the PC term for it nowadays because people don't like the idea of cold fusion. Electromagnetic theory is probably the idea of scalar physics, like I was talking about before, which is that there's an element of electromagnetic theory that we've lost when Maxwell's equations were reduced by Oliver Heaviside. And then gravitics is clearly, just floating freely, possibly, for anti-gravity. And the thermodynamics aspect, I'm not sure, may just be as simple as the second law of thermodynamics or potentially being violated, which is the idea that like hot stuff flows to cold, and that maybe we can violate that if we have the capability of free energy.
Correct me if I'm wrong too, but there's also a sort of inherent violation of the principle of like the law of conservation of energy, that energy cannot be created or destroyed, is sort of inherently thrown out the window by some of these propulsion systems that seem to be drawing energy straight out of the ether or out of another dimension around us.
Oh, you nailed it. I mean, you are on it. You've done your homework for sure, because
that's
really what it comes down to. Thomas Bearden talks about that, and I think we literally are going to have to rewrite the law of conservation of energy, which blows my mind.
Yeah, we'll dig into that more when we open up the documents. That there's a paper that Ashton sent me that is sort of a theoretical physics document from people that are not inside of Disclosure, that are trying to work out this technology and clearly do not have crafts to back engineer from, but they are theorizing about how potentially opening up a dimension below could be opening up sort of like energy pockets, and it's pretty interesting. But now I want to transfer us into sort of what brought Ashton onto the scene and sort of exploded Ashton's sort of presence on the internet. And you've been a huge voice for citizen journalism and for disclosure and truth when it comes to flight MH370. Could you give us like the Spark Notes version of the like original story of what happened in case anyone doesn't know about this airplane?
Yeah. So MH370 was a flight that was going from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, flying northeast. And about 40 minutes into the flight, the plane just goes completely dark, falls off of radar, falls off a flight tracker. And that's like all we knew for several days, is that people were wondering where this plane went, what happened to it. There was all this weird obfuscation in the news. And then we've got, these press conferences going on where it seems like we're being fed like partial information. They're not answering questions directly. And then a few days later, they say, oh, well, we are actually tracking it on military radar. And we know that this didn't crash in the South China Sea where we've been searching for days and days and days. And actually it flew back across Malaysia. And everyone's going, what? So, then they finally show us this radar track, and we see that the plane turned and went to Penang, which is the closest airport to go to for like a 777, which is a huge airplane, by the way. It holds like 300 people. For it to potentially land in an emergency scenario. But for some reason, they say it doesn't land there, and it then takes this kind of northwest turn and goes to the Malacca Straits, the Andaman Sea, and the Nicobar Islands. And then I believe it was March 13th. Yeah, so this is actually a good kind of overview. You can see the flight track over on the right side of the screen here. March 13th, they say, oh, well, actually, we're going to search in the South Indian Ocean. And everyone's like, wait, what? South Indian Ocean? That's nowhere near where any of this stuff's going on. And it wasn't until May 28th where the raw telemetry data was released. Before that, there was just this graph that had some up and down lines, and nobody knows what it means. And people weren't even able to interpret it. And that's when they came out with this kind of satellite pings that had been alluded to in the media, that this plane was being tracked by some satellite pings, and they were able to develop these arcs that determined like where the plane potentially was, but they didn't know exactly where, just somewhere along the arc. And so they determined that this plane flew to the South Indian Ocean, that turned there in the Nicobar Islands straight south, and flew for like 5 or 6 hours and supposedly ran out of fuel, and that this plane crashed into the ocean. Now they're somewhere along the 7th arc. Now the problem was we searched for over 3 years, and we didn't find one piece of the plane down there. Nothing. Like, this plane is a giant plane. It should have blown up into thousands of pieces, bodies, luggage, parts everywhere, floating. It's going to spread out. We'd be able to see it from space. Nothing.
Because this happened about 10 years ago now, correct?
Yeah, it was March 7th, March 8th, 2014. And so, we look back through all of it, and just kind of as a spoiler, like, we determined that those satellite pings that they talked about, that they said they went to the South Indian Ocean, that just didn't ever happen. And there's no way that the United States government wouldn't have known exactly where this plane is, because we've got Diego Garcia military base, which you see kind of on the bottom left. Actually, I'm probably covering it up, but it's somewhere like right around here where my hand is.
Down here,
Yep. And then we've got Pine Gap military base in Australia that would have been able to track this plane as well. As a very advanced military base. There's a Coco Islands signals intelligence base that's like actually on the supposed flight track to the South Indian Ocean. As well as there's like 4 different countries. Like India has Coco Island, or like northern Coco Islands there, should have been able to track it. Indonesia should have been able to see it. Thailand never says anything about their radar capability. So you're sitting there wondering, like, something's amiss here. We found out about SBIRS system, space-based infrared system, constantly scanning the whole world all the time.
We found out about this. We have that. I think I have that video. It's not that
I can play it.
Is this the one?
Yeah.
So
this is kind of self-explanatory. Look at that right there.
Yeah. And
So
this
this
is
shows-
what company is it that is in charge of
Lockheed
developing
Martin.
this? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin, you're going to find out, is like a reoccurring character in these stories. They are coming up all the time. You can look at how big these scans are. We found that it's hard to find like a lot of information, but there's quite a bit of open source pieces here and there. They might be scanning the world like every 10 seconds. They also have stairs and scanners, so you can kind of deduce that the stairs are going to be able to produce probably a more high quality image versus the scanners, which are just kind of do big swaths of scans. But you can see these are like thousands of kilometers, thousands of miles scans that are going on. And this is a big constellation. So we were also able to figure out that this is relaying information to ground-based computers. I also found some corroborating evidence of the last few weeks that they actually literally use Google Earth with another program called Quick Terrain Modeler to produce like 3D virtual environments so that they can track objects. Now, the official story for this system is that it's used to track missiles, but we don't really have a lot of missiles going off all the time. So you could imagine how this could easily be used to track boats, planes, anything really that you need to. We never forget who we're working for. To me, this is just like Marvel movie Hail Hydra stuff right here.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, it is definitely Marvel movie Hail Hydra stuff.
So in addition to that, though, we've got the SOSA system. So you probably remember the Titan sub that imploded, this tiny sub that holds 4 people by the Titanic. The Navy just doesn't say anything that they knew the moment it popped, like that it imploded. They had this SOSA system, this acoustic detection system that can triangulate and pinpoint the exact location of where it happened. 5 days later, they say, oh, yeah, we heard that. We just didn't want to say anything while all these oxygen counters are going off on the news. I actually dug into this recently, talked to Eric Hecker about this, who used to work on submarines. He's like, no, we've had that system for like decades, and it's extremely powerful and can pinpoint pretty much anything. So if a plane size of a city block is crashing into the ocean, the SOSA system should be able to exactly pinpoint it. And then the last system is the over-the-horizon radar, which I don't think people know about for some reason, because people think that like, oh, you have radar, it's going to be limited to how far you can see. No, they bounce it off the ionosphere, and it can see for thousands of miles. And this is also decades and decades old. So Pine Gap and actually they've speculated that JORN, the Jindalee Operational Radar Network in Australia, has this capability. We found that there are portable versions of it, which I don't even know what that means exactly. But it would blow me away if both Diego Garcia and Pine Gap didn't have that. So this idea that like the United States didn't see this plane is patently absurd. They absolutely 100% must have known what happened to this plane.
And the official narrative, if I'm not mistaken, is that we still don't know. There's like apparently pieces of it that have washed up in various places, but allegedly the official story is that it must have crashed somewhere, but we don't really know where. And we've found some debris, but the story is just, who knows at this point? Is that the official narrative right now?
The official narrative is they don't know what happened to the plane, that it's a mystery. And the debris actually contraindicates a crash in the South Indian Ocean, which people don't really realize, but debris washes up in Africa. We've got a crash off the coast of Australia, and they have only 3 pieces of confirmed debris. If you guys look at the CNN article, Google it, 3 pieces of confirmed debris. That's it. Tiny pieces of debris. Like, this is not some significant percentage of the plane. This is not proof. There it is right there. Those 3 tiny pieces of the wing there are not 100% proof that this plane crashed at all. And just to give people some perspective, Africa is 2,000 to 3,000 miles away from the supposed crash site. Even this flaperon, which is the one that you've got highlighted right there on the screen, the media had never told anybody that it wasn't connected with a unique serial number. They just use a non-unique part number to connect it to the plane, which the narrative that we put forth doesn't require. This can be from MH370, this debris, because it's really a matter of like where this plane supposedly went down, or if this landed in, say, Diego Garcia and they just threw some pieces in the ocean. It would actually make sense for it to get to the Reunion Islands and to Africa. But like, there's a piece of engine cowling. You see that engine cowling one on the bottom there? That showed up in South Africa, and that's 3,000 miles away. It's actually literally impossible for that piece of engine cowling to have floated that far from the supposed crash sites. And the currents actually flowed to the east down there in the South Indian Ocean. So this stuff should have washed up in Australia. And a lot of people don't realize this. They even tested the flaperon, and the first thing, they put some boards in the water, and they immediately realized there was no chance it was going to get to the Reunion Island. So they cover that up. They don't mention it. And then they get the Americans, people who are possibly implicated in the disappearance of this plane, to give them a real flaperon from a 777. They throw that in the water, and it sticks out of the water like this. And they're like, okay, great, because in order for this thing to drift, they need wind blowing on it so that it will blow over here. The problem is the side that's sticking out of the water has barnacles all over it, how can it have barnacles all over it if it's sticking out of the water? And then they look at the barnacle growth and they find out that, well, it's been 16 months since this plane disappeared and we've got this flapper on. But the barnacle growth is only consistent with 4 months of it being in the water. So, like, if you guys people just piece it together here, this is just disinformation, essentially. This idea that the debris confirms this plane crashed in the South Indian Ocean. At a minimum, it confirms that that location is wrong. And at most, it confirms that, you know, this plane potentially didn't crash at all. Because you look at that debris there, that's not very much.
And there's a serious cover up going on, right?
Well, that's the scary part, is that for a lot of people, the idea of how big this cover up would have to be is too much for them to grasp. Now, I think that you can kind of grasp because you've dug into some pretty dark stuff that's out there. But it was shocking for me to think that, like, wait, America can get in touch with Malaysia, Thailand, India, Australia, and, you know, basically just do like a total blackout on information and just force the media to only present the information that will push the story that they want. And then even to get some of these experts in this like independent group that was formed, which I might have to look into how that group was even formed, and get them to like get convinced that these satellite pings are real and have them do their own analysis to come to their own analysis on how this proves the plane crashed in the South Indian Ocean. So it's definitely very sketchy, and I think that not only is there a conspiracy, but I think our own government. I think you're American, right? You're not Canadian, right?
Yep.
Okay. I think our government did this, and it hurts me to think that we're potentially that evil that we would cover something up like this. But that's what my investigation shows.
But, you know, anytime I think about stories like this, I think about, like, if I was in their seat about to cover this up, what would my justification be? And is that a thing that you could believe humans justifying? And if you think about like the national security argument of like these technologies are going to change the world, or like perhaps they have weaponry that could literally be like 100 times worse than nukes. Perhaps there are things that we don't know about it that allow them to justify to themselves like the level of secrecy needed, the level of conspiracy to cover this up is worth the 100+ lives that were lost by this flight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
The greater good, right? And this is why I like talking to you, because you rationalize it logically like I do, which is like, why the big cover up? Like that, it has to be something major. Because then we found out right away there was 500 pounds of lithium-ion batteries in the cargo bay of this plane, which have been outlawed on passenger planes, and since this time happened because of how dangerous they are. And we find out that 2 pallets of them were in the forward cargo bay, and that they weren't security screened. Like they missed 2 security screens. And I'm going, this is weird. Like this is very dangerous. And it just kind of gets glossed over. The Malaysian Airlines CEO lies about it for a week until March 20th, 2014. And then says, oh yeah, there was some dangerous cargo. There's 500 pounds of dangerous lithium-ion batteries. And I'm going, whoa, because you go look at the witnesses then after that, and you realize all the witnesses corroborated a fire event. We've got a guy that sees the plane on fire when it goes dark, 9 people on the coast that hear loud noises at the exact same time, 8 fishermen on a boat 10 minutes later, that now it's been confirmed there was an emergency descent that happened right after this, after a plane goes dark. These fishermen saw it in the emergency descent. That descent is 100% consistent with a fire event going off. And then what they're doing is they're depressurizing the plane, but not to knock everybody out. They're depressurizing the plane to get people enough oxygen to be able to breathe because of the fire event that's going on, the fire extinguishing gas that's sucking the oxygen out of the plane. And then an hour and 20 minutes after the plane goes dark, you've got Catherine T in the Nicobar Islands at the same location where the narrative says this plane turned into the South Indian Ocean. And she sees a glowing orange plane with no navigation lights, meaning no power, with black smoke coming out of the back of it. And that glow is consistent with the bromine from the halon fire extinguishing devices permeating throughout the plane. And that's a halogen gas from the chemical reaction of them fighting the fire. And there's also a Mayday call only reported in China Times News. We couldn't find it anywhere else, that said that seemingly China intercepted communication from the Taiwanese embassy of Malaysian Airlines attempting an emergency landing and disintegrating, which when you look at the videos that we're going to look at, and Catherine T's sighting, completely consistent. Her sighting had the plane flying low, and it looked like it was descending throughout the time of her sighting. And you just go, whoa, this was a fire. So then you ask the same question we asked before, is why are you covering this up? There's got to be something like huge to cover up something just normal, like a fire event.
And I think before we get to the fire event, we need to cover the strange passengers, correct?
Oh, yes. So
And these are not are these just other strange anomalies, or is this relevant?
So
to
this
what
one
we're
I haven't
talking about?
reported on much because every time I talk about this, people ask to say that you're racist or something like this. But
Uh-huh.
this was an odd thing that came up, I think in 2020, that somebody was looking at Diego Garcia's Facebook and they found these pictures and they went, wait, this looks just like the crew of Malaysian Airlines. So every single comparison you see here is one of the people in the crew. You can see Shaw, the main captain, in the top middle. Bottom right is the second captain who was about to get married. And then some of these other people were all crew members, either stewardesses or flight crew as well. And now, some of them do look pretty similar, some less than others. Keep in mind that they would be 6 years older than they were when the plane disappeared. But the reason why this is important is this plane somehow did get to Diego Garcia, which there's circumstantial evidence. There's not really hard proof that it got to Diego Garcia. But you can imagine, what do you do with the passengers? Like, anyone who survived would be wards of the state. Like, we would have to do something. I expected maybe we put them in witness protection, but some people say you make them live out their whole lives on the island, and that, I mean, it's hard to wrap your brain around. But again, that's the big question. Everyone wonders, what happened to the passengers? Where did they go? What did we do with them? And I got to tell people, I'm not psychic. Like, I put together a lot of evidence here, and you can figure out a lot from what we can see, but there's still a lot we don't know. The United States government's the only one who can really tell us exactly what happened and what happened with these passengers.
So to summarize where we're at so far, there's a seemingly regular flight that's Malaysian Air, starts its flight, something strange happens, its flight goes totally haywire, it goes dark, a bunch of weird radar stuff happens, it disappears into the ocean, and at first nobody knows much about it, and there's a bunch of weird reporting coming at us from the government that is kind of misleading and kind of changing day by day. At what point do people start to dig into what the passengers on the plane might have been about, and at what point did we discover the passengers that were associated with the software company and that connection?
Yeah, pretty much right away. And there's a very weird interview, which I don't think I gave you the clip on, where Mike Harris, who was a contractor for Motorola, which is where Freescale Semiconductors broke off of in 2004, talks. I think it's like Project Camelot interview, talks all about these Freescale Semiconductor employees. There's 20 of them on board this plane. There was also a couple other important like technology, telecommunications type employees that were on this plane, but the 20 Freescale Semiconductor employees was stuck out right away, because most people realize, like, a large companies that have important intellectual property, they don't allow more than like 2 or 3 people. Even my company, I think the policy is 2 or 3 people. But it's very weird because we looked at where they were sitting, and like they were all sitting next to each other. Some of them even had their whole families with them. And I just thought, this is very bizarre. This sticks out again, kind of like the lithium ion batteries do. So we start digging into it, and we realize that they're connected to U.S. aerospace and defense through, you can find some press releases about serving RF power needs. But we found something that I think was a huge smoking gun, is found a 2005 National Security Agency report on the commercial emergence of superconductive microchips. And that to me was like, whoa, because when I first looked at the MH370 videos, one of the key things I thought was necessary is superconductivity, this idea that electrons can just flow freely, that this starts to enable some magical type effects under the right circumstances. And these superconductive microchips are also used in stuff like quantum computers, advanced AI, etc. So you look at that and you go, now you're starting to build this idea of like, where are these people going? And one thing I want to point out too is that even recently, there's been reports about espionage between the United States and China in terms of stealing intellectual property. It's been argued that China steals roughly $300 to $600 billion worth of intellectual property from American companies every year. And you know what the number one targets are? Chinese nationals that are working for American companies. So of those 20 people, 12 were Malaysian nationals and 8 were Chinese nationals. So to me, you start to build to me, the most plausible theory for a cover-up and hiding this plane is some type of espionage, counter-espionage related to the intellectual property that was on board. You don't do this giant cover-up for just money. It's got to be something much bigger. And when we look at these videos, you see this technology that looks, a lot of people are going to go, this is non-human intelligence. This is not human technology. But if it is human technology, and we have had that technology, you can imagine that you would do anything to prevent your adversaries from getting it, because whoever has the technology that we're going to be looking at has absolute military supremacy over the planet, period.
Yep. Speaking of that technology, do you think I should start with the drone video or the satellite video first?
Probably just the satellite video to give people more context.
First?
Satellite video was released first. It was in the description, this all comes from a Regicided On YouTube channel. We've confirmed it goes back to 2014. I saw one of these videos in 2014 as well, not both of them, but the satellite video says received March 12th, 2014. That's 4 days after the plane disappeared. It says source protected. And it was published May 19th, 2014, which is 9 days before that raw telemetry data was available. And we can see there's a mouse on this screen consistent with a Citrix session where somebody's actually logged into a spy satellite database and doing a screen recording. This isn't a camera.
Yeah.
We see these orbs come in. One of these orbs came in at like 2,000 miles an hour. We can tell based on the pixels and this plane descending. We can see this smoke in the back of the plane, which is not contrails because that's cumulus clouds. This is very low altitude that this plane is at here. You can tell right away there's a purpose with this weird formation around the plane. Perfect triangle formation, equilateral triangle. It looks like it's mapping the plane. And then it changes this ring formation here. And this all happens within like 30 seconds. And then you're going to see the main event. Poof, it's just gone. But the clouds don't get sucked in. It's not like a black hole. It's not an explosion. The clouds don't get blown away like a nuclear weapon. We know E equals MC squared. So if this was some kind of annihilation event based on conventional physics, we should see like part of the planet getting destroyed. That's a huge amount of mass that we see there.
Yeah.
So this is where right away you look at these, you go, this is weird. And a lot of people may go, no, this has just got to be graphics. It's got to be a video game or something like that. But there's so many bizarre details going on here, including, we can't see it right now, but pretty much right where my hand is, there is coordinates right down here in the bottom left. It says NROL 22. That is National Reconnaissance Office Launch 22, shot up in 2006. That's the first launch of the SBIR system, the Space-Based Infrared System in 2006. That's a weird detail to add to your fake video. And then it has the coordinates. You can see the coordinates only move when the perspective changes, which means we're not looking down through a satellite that's moving, because otherwise those coordinates would be changing constantly. This is some kind of computer-generated feed system, like we were just talking about the SBIR system, pulling data from satellites, generating a realistic 3D imagery tracking an object. So we were able to deduce all this. And the first question I ask is, if these videos are fake, how am I able to deduce the real spy satellite capabilities of the United States military from these videos just looking at it? And you know, if there was just one video like this, it wouldn't be enough, although it's pretty damn compelling because, again, those coordinates are the real location of the plane in the Nicobar Islands. And this is potentially a very large field of view. So those coordinates aren't like tracking the plane. Those coordinates are somewhere else, and they're just moving the screen to keep it cropped in to track the plane. We also don't see the drone, which means that they're cropping potentially U.S. assets out of this, possibly to minimize damage to the United States. There may be other assets too. Like the French father was told the United States knows what happened to this plane, and that there was 2 AWACS, these like advanced radar planes that were in the area. So what if there's like another AWAC somewhere, if they just cropped it out carefully so that people don't see that? This is like right away. I had seen the drone video in 2014, but when I saw this one as well back in August of 2023, I went, wait, there's 2 videos and they're in perfect synchronization with one another. And later on, we find out there's no discrepancies. Like if somebody made these, they made no mistakes whatsoever anywhere.
And so the drone video came out like a couple weeks later, right?
Yeah, it says
the same
drone video says, by the same person. Says received June 5th, 2014, and then it says published June 12th, 2014. So you start to develop, there's like a story here. Like this first video gets published, the registered non-person makes a Twitter account, says watch this before it's deleted on May 22nd, and then tags MH370 in it. The drone video, as you kind of showed earlier, this is a perfect overlay, thermal overlay of MH370. It's on my banner on Twitter. I've kept it there since the very beginning of this. In fact, it's very similar to what I've got going on right here, which is, this is not an accurate from the video shirt, but somebody made this and I bought like 3 of them. But right here, like to me, looking at this, I don't know how people can think this is fake. The amount of detail we're looking at right here, especially when you look at these orbs, like this one is like the high intelligence video. We're seeing so much information about the technology right here that they leaked this, because the first one was like, hey, here's what happened to the plane at a broad scale. This one is like, this is how the orbs work. Here's how the technology works. All of this will check out from physics perspective. You just have to look in and you have to watch and see for yourself. And they even do this slow-mo part that we're seeing here. Like, why would you add this slow-mo part where you look right at these orbs in super, close up? And at the end, too, they do a super slow-mo of that zap that we just saw there as well. These orbs are not like metal spheres. Now, there might be like a small metal sphere inside, but this is a plasma shell around it. And remember, we were talking about low energy nuclear reactions. Well, I talked to an expert in low energy nuclear reactions, Bob Greenier, and he looks into cold fusion. He says what we see there with that heat signature wasn't even publicly known information until 2015 with an Aalto University paper about topological monopoles.
Yeah.
It's basically the Tesla sign that you see there, this heat signature inside.
Because you can see how each of these spheres is actually hotter on one side and colder on the other side, which you're saying, I believe, is indicative of a monopole, meaning like a toroidal energy field where energy is flowing in one direction and sort of being sucked in through the other direction, correct?
Yeah, you've actually just nailed it. Yeah, and so that you can imagine there's this toroid, which is a donut shape inside there, and it creates this plasma field of a heat signature, a half dome, so to speak, in front of it, and it's perpetually. It could be extracting energy from the environment and using that and feeding into it, and that's why you see this umbrella shape where it kind of then comes back around. Like you imagine it kind of shooting up and then coming back around there, and we actually see in the satellite video, which we watched earlier. Right before the plane disappears, you can't tell on first look, but if you've watched the videos many times as me, the orbs actually slow down right before the zap a little bit. And then we watch that drone video. There's a moment where the heat signatures kind of blur for a second right before the zap, and then they converge, and it lines up so we can tell that whatever's happening with the slowdown is happening at the same time these orbs are reorienting. And that's what Bob Greenier said too when he looked at these videos before I even talked to him. He goes, okay, now we can see them reorienting. And I didn't even get what he was talking about, but they're creating what he calls a tor -1. But he says they're creating like a donut between them. So they have their own kind of donut shape going on in there, but then they create their own larger donut shape there. And he says, this is exactly what we would expect from John Wheeler's scientific research, as well as the Ehrenhoff-Bohm effect, which, a lot of that stuff delves into quantum physics. And this is where I'm like, if these videos are fake, why do we have like all this scientific support that's not really necessarily mainstream, but it's not rejected by mainstream either, that would supports what we're seeing here?
And some of it was stuff that was not even publicly disclosed, like the satellite's existence, right? Like certain parts of it were not even disclosed when the videos were originally leaked. Am I wrong on that?
So people look at the satellite video even now in 2024 and they go, how am I looking up at this plane? I'm like, no, you're looking down. Like people don't realize you're looking down. No one has any idea that we even have video capability, although it seems obvious in retrospect.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know what satellite imagery looked like until Trump posted the satellite picture in 2019. And that was of USA 224 looking down at an Iranian missile silo from a similar angle as well.
Yeah.
I would speculate that they had video of that as well. And they just took a still. And they gave us a still that gave away the least amount of information about it. Because as you guys can see already from this conversation, just one piece of surveillance information, even when it's cropped, we're able to deduce a huge amount of information about our surveillance apparatus. And so this is why they protect this stuff so much, is that if some random guy on Twitter who's just a healthcare IT consultant can start to figure out exactly all how our advanced technology and surveillance system works from just 2 videos, they're only a minute long, then it's very scary to get anything out there in public sphere. And if you can go back to the drone video one more time, there's a couple things I want to point out here for people that might have missed it. Yeah, especially even this event right here. This is the money event. They're collapsing on the plane. You can see the plane blur, and you can see actually the orbs bend in the last frame where it's consistent with gravitational lens right there. So, and that right there that's a lot of detail to throw in there. Why do you have a gravitational lensing effect happening in your potentially fake video? But that cold event we see right there, that's a cold, dark endothermic event. And the more I keep thinking about this cold, dark endothermic event, as far as I can tell, this does not exist. Like there is no such thing as videos that look like this. This is why I think it catches people off guard. But if you're a physicist and you look at this, you go, holy crap, this proves the ether is real. Because this is negative energy that we're seeing here, an absorption of energy. If you were faking this and you were going to fake that this plane is getting obliterated, you would have it be an explosion, a release of energy. It would be white hot, but instead it's dark and cold. So this is actually, as hard as this is to believe, this is consistent with warp drive. This is consistent with a wormhole, like a real actual wormhole. That's what it looks like right there. Tesla was right. There is an ether. And when we see the orbs converging, that has purpose too. When the orbs are converging, this is consistent with Coulomb's law, which when you look at the equations for Coulomb's law, the denominator is r squared, which is distance squared. And what that means is as the distance of the orbs comes together, the energy level increases exponentially. So people wonder, how can you achieve energy levels that are high enough to pull this off? I thought that was impossible. Well, If those orbs are basically pure energy and they're converging like that, they're achieving something that's called breaking the Schwinger limit, where it becomes non-linear, which is this idea of like, imagine like taking your painting and like punching a hole through your painting to the fabric behind it. That's essentially what we're seeing here in this video. And again, this is one of those things where like I've only been able to figure this science out over the last few months. It's been a journey of discovery of the science too, going back 6 months and talking to Navy engineer Salvatore Paez, my friend. I spoke about Bob Greenier, who's in Lower Engineering Reactions. I met a guy who's now a really good friend of mine named Dave Rossi, who is a DoD contractor as well, who works on some of these labs. And these guys are in some cases just straight up saying that they think is real and that they've even seen this kind of stuff out there. So this kind of starts to connect the idea of the special access programs to this advanced technology. And one last thing I want to point out is that we're not looking at like aliens or even humans inside those orbs. When we watch that movement, it's a perfect sinusoidal pattern, which is a wave pattern, like a sine wave. This has to be, it could be something where we looked at that consciousness center thing. Like you could imagine maybe there's like consciousness that is controlling these, but I think it's just like an advanced computer or that it's some kind of lock and targeting mechanism. Could be AI that's running this, could be a quantum computer, maybe that we don't understand all the purposes of those quantum computers, or maybe just a regular old supercomputer. But you look at that movement there, that's a 3D rendering of the movement of the orbs. And I want to give credit to some of the people on Reddit. I'm not a big Reddit fan, but early on the first week, some of them are good people. Early on the first week, people did so much research into these videos, I couldn't even believe it. And the more research people did about like the Citrix session, the remote terminal login, this kind of stuff, you look at it and you're like, there's been no hoax video ever in the history of the world that has this much detail in it that people can do this much investigation. And
so they did this render while it was moving, and then they went and they showed us what it looks like, right, when the plane is not moving.
Because they're actually going around the plane in a sphere. This is how you can tell that they're mapping it. So now I've been able to deduce from this that they're trying to figure out exactly how big the zap has to be, how big the energy level has to be in order to create a zap that's going to encompass the plane, but not, way too big, for example. And Salvatore Paez pointed out as well is that in his high frequency gravitational wave generator, patent, that you could potentially amplify energy to such a degree that you could destroy an asteroid or a planetoid with this. So now you start to realize the real implications of this. This is a weapon. This is potentially a super weapon. And I looked up hypersonics because I heard Tucker Carlson talking to Putin about it, and Putin keeps dropping this hypersonics. People wondering, what is that? So I started to Google it, and you find out that it got pictures of missiles, but they have a plasma sheath in front of them. And supposedly this is how they're able to, get through the issue of friction where, something would just rip apart otherwise by going at very high speeds. And I looked at that video and I went, wait a minute, that's a plasma field around some smaller object that we can't see in there. I think you can technically classify these as hypersonic weapons, potentially United States' hypersonic weapons that go well beyond just moving really fast. But like now we're talking about having these quantum macroscopic effects occurring here. So I think that this is going to show that we are going to have to change the laws of physics. I mean, they're pretty close to what we need, but we're going to have to rewrite like law of conservation of energy and come to terms with the idea that there is an ether and that people have this idea of dark energy. And what they say about dark energy is that we need that to explain how, when the Big Bang happened, how space expanded faster than the speed of light. And that's how we know that we can go somehow faster than the speed of light. And the answer to that is also the ether. The ether also solves that problem. Essentially, dark energy is essentially the equivalent of negative energy. And the ether itself is unlimited negative energy. And how this makes sense is, imagine the speed of light is not actually constant. So if we were to like shine a laser through a glass of water, we're going to see a refraction. And so you have to imagine there's the speed of light seems like it only is constant, but that's because it's always going through space-time, the medium that we're all in. If you take the medium away, space-time as we're in it, and you go to the ether, now the speed of light can go much faster. Tesla measured it going faster 50 times its normal speed. And so this now answers all the questions about the Big Bang, answers also, in my opinion, the nature of our reality, which I'm convinced at this point, it's the holographic principle. Now, I wouldn't say simulation, but yeah, go ahead.
Let's move to that. Let's move to this other document, because anyone who's not familiar with your work, Ashton, should just know that you have spent months and months analyzing those videos. And very honestly engaging with debunkers of every sort about those videos. Like, you and many other people have like analyzed the clouds pixel by pixel, analyzed the jet streams, analyzed every single piece of that video. And anyone who is still very, legitimately skeptical of how crazy those videos we just showed are, just take it that there has been a lot of research done, and you should go and look that research up for yourself and make your own decisions about it. But before we get too deep into this, something I probably should have said at the start is that it's important to sort of keep in mind that you don't have to believe anything 100%. No one has to think like, okay, I saw this presentation and it convinced me, and now I know aliens are real and space-time is a lie and all that. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is that there's enough evidence that we all should be asking a lot of questions, because if it's all totally wrong, like if everything is wrong, if it's all made up, then at the very least, we should be going through the process of figuring that out for sure and then learning from that. But if there's any chance that any of this is real, which there's a big chance, then it deserves all of our effort and all of our energy to explore, because of the fundamental nature of how important it is, right? So when we get into this next document talking about sort of we're not going to go so deep into it because it's like mind-blowingly complicated, but at least some of the graphics and some of the physics of how these other dimensions, how the ether might work.
Yeah, if I
It's
can
just
comment
because
on
it's
that
going to
real quick.
revolutionize us so much.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So, what I was going to say is my friend Ian Carroll, who I'm chatting with right now, he brought up a couple of really good points, is that the more important something is, the more we should want to look into it. Absolutely. And the other side of it too is that anybody who thinks that they're 100% certain about something, you should be pretty skeptical of in general. And when I do say that I'm pretty certain these videos are real, sometimes I talk about it like I'm 100% sure. There's obviously some room for reasonable doubt in there. And this is the part where I take issue with a lot of these people that are debunkers, because it seems like they just want the stuff to go away. They want to find some small thing that they can rationalize to make it go away. I'm not asking anybody to believe me. That's actually not what I want whatsoever. I want people to just look at the weight of the evidence and come to their own conclusions about it. And I think that evidence is so strong that we deserve to get an answer from the United States government about what we know about this plane and what they know about these videos. And I think that no matter what side of it on, you should want that. So anybody who's coming out there and they're saying they don't think the United States government should issue a statement, that's really skeptical in my mind, because we've got more evidence than there's ever been for any weird, anomalous, UFO video.
Exactly. Here in this document, I figure, so this is a document that Ashton, you sent me. It's from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it's about physicists exploring the concept of warp drives, dark energy, basically like how do we create faster than light travel in order to make it at all realistic for us to colonize other planets and other solar systems eventually. And this is clearly written from the perspective of someone who is not looking at alien tech and not read into like crazy advanced technology. They're looking at it from a purely human physicist standpoint, like the kind of thing that you would find at any university campus in the country of the highest level of physics, trying to tackle the concept of what might a warp drive consist of, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of Einstein physics, as well as it mentions Alcubierre drive, which is really how this all works. Honestly, Star Trek was right. Star Trek warp drive seems to be how this all works. The Casimir effect, which we see right there, which a lot of people would argue that this proves there is some type of neg entropy or negative energy that must be going on. If we put two plates together, why do they just stick together? Why is there a force that occurs? And what you're looking at there is because certain wavelengths, when you stick it together, they can't fit anymore between the two plates. And this, I think, represents the idea that there really is an ether out there, which is there's some interaction between our reality and something underneath that's causing this. Physics would say, oh, there's these vacuum fluctuations that are happening, or that there are virtual particles. And that's just the ether with extra steps, to be honest.
Them just trying to explain what they're observing to make their already preconceived equations make sense, right?
That's the issue, is everybody's trying to build on it, right? As opposed to saying, well, maybe we just got it wrong, and maybe like Tesla was right, and maybe like Kaluza was right, that we just need to add an extra dimension, and that can solve a lot of these problems that are out there. Fun fact, Defense Intelligence Agency, this is from 2010, General Mike Flynn was actually the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency under Trump. And he actually follows me on Twitter, which is a fun little tidbit. I've got a general that follows me on Twitter.
Yeah, General Flynn's cool.
Weird. Oh, yeah. I like him.
Yep. Everyone's got their opinions about General Flynn, but he seems like a
Yeah.
pretty honest guy. He's doing good things. So this is where I briefly summarize my understanding of what's going on, and I'm going to read my understanding, and this graphic illustrates it quite well. And I want you to tell me if you think that I have correctly summarized what we're learning here. They obviously go into a lot more detail about like the actual like theories in physics that explain this and the history of that understanding built in physics. It's not just like random stuff pulled out of a hat. But my sort of layman's description of it is, if I'm reading this right, theoretical physics has proposed through many avenues the existence of other dimensions, perhaps either vastly large or microscopically tiny, layered into what we observe as a four-dimensional universe, 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimension. This is done largely just to explain the existence of dark matter and dark energy, which is an unexplained but observable phenomenon. And if the relationship is true, then other dimensions creating this dark energy, then it is observable to us mathematically that the size aspect of those other dimensions directly affects the density of that dark energy. So what they describe in here is that if these other dimensions are really big, then that dark energy is really dispersed. And if these other dimensions are really small, then that dark energy gets really concentrated. And if you change the sort of scale of like that dimension in a local way, maybe around a spaceship, then you can manipulate huge amounts of dark energy by changing the scale of what's going on, which this graphic kind of illustrates. So thus, if you could create a technology that could stretch, expand, or contract that other dimension locally around a craft, you would exponentially impact the density of dark energy around the craft, kind of like I've tried to come up with an analogy like putting a large boulder in the path of a wave break and all the water has to rush around it really fast, which is not a super great analogy, but it's a good visual to kind of like key
It's a
us in
bubble, right?
to what's
Yeah.
happening here. Right.
Yeah, you make yourself a bubble, and this also could potentially lead to inertial mass reduction, which is the idea that you just displace yourself from space time, and now your object can just float freely, or your bubble can float freely. It's kind
Exactly.
of like a bubble in the water as well.
Hence how we can observe crafts, like the military has observed many crafts, which we have videos of crafts entering the water and continuing to travel at air speeds, like
Hmm.
insane speeds that nothing can travel underwater at, which explains a lot of these sort of like physics problems that we're observing in UFO videos.
It also makes me think that there's a reason why we film everything in infrared as opposed to the optical spectrum. Is that perhaps there's a connection there that we know there's these electromagnetic craft out there, and that's why we film everything infrared, because we want to be able to detect
That would
them
make
better.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Real quick on the dimensions thing, just to help out the
yeah.
audience, is that so people wonder about the dimensions. So 3 spatial dimensions, up and down, forward and back, left and right. 4th dimension is time. So time is kind of we perceive as moving forward, but actually it's not consistent. Time is actually can be bent as well, which is weird to think about. And then the 5th dimension, if one exists, would be the ether. This is like the underlying framework of our reality that we generally don't perceive. And extra dimension is not a place where you go to where there's like Bizarro Ian and Bizarro Ashton there, and I've got a mustache and Ian doesn't have one. It's really just the underlying framework. You don't go hang out in the alternate dimension. It's a matter of it's a shortcut between points in time. And this is important because it represents the idea, especially if the speed of light is no longer constant in the ether, that really all points that we see around us are connected, but they're just connected on a higher dimension that we don't perceive. This is important to the idea of remote viewing and consciousness, because you could then think of this idea, well, I can see something that's potentially even infinitely far away because I can kind of remote view it because all those points are not as far away as they seem. It's just an illusion of our perception.
Yeah. One of the sort of as yet unprovable theories that I really love to kind of dabble in is that consciousness is the 5th dimension in some form. Like what we perceive as consciousness is actually a unified field in some form that connects all things, and that we're sort of like receptors for, like we're antenna for. I think that's a really fun avenue of speculation to play with.
Yeah, the avatar theory. I personally think that rings pretty true with me in general. Another fun fact is that we have 2 right and left hemispheres of our brain. And a lot of what Thomas Bearden talked about with respect to scalar physics has to do with interferometry. Interferometry is like crossing the streams in Ghostbusters. And you can imagine if our brains are sending these brain waves out, that we're actually doing interferometry all the time within our local reality to maybe even potentially produce our reality collectively. So I'm with you on that. I think it's interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah. So one question that actually this whole image and everything brought up for me is what this image, what this concept explains, if this is the type of general technology that's being used to make possible this crazy movement of these crafts, these propulsions, is essentially what they're doing is they're making a bubble around the craft that sort of like extracts it from our spatial dimensions. Actually, I just remembered that there's another image down here further. It's in this section here where what they're talking about is how you require this insane amount of energy to create the sort of like separation of space around a craft. They have this number 10 to the 50-second power of energy required. But then they have a little snippet that talks about how if you could make the shell of that bubble microscopically like 1 Planck length thin, it would require way less energy. And it got me thinking to like, okay, it's like if you're encapsulating a sort of an ether bubble in a really thin layer of sort of like transmedium material energy, then my brain goes to the eternal question of why the fuck are the aliens crashing? Like, why would an alien fly across the universe and then crash when he's like flying around Utah? And a lot of the speculation is that nuclear blasts may have had something to do with those crashes, as in perhaps nuclear technology interferes with the propulsion technology of these crafts in some way. And I can't think of anything that's a better candidate for disrupting a energy bubble of ether inside and space-time outside that's maybe hair thin or less. A nuclear blast seems like a pretty strong candidate for what might interrupt that technology and cause its propulsion to fail, so to speak. Does that track in your
that's
mind?
I mean, you nailed it. I was actually going to bring up the shell thing about the idea of like, if we don't have a really thick shell, if we just make a really thin shell, because why does it have to be thick? Like the whole point is we just need to displace ourselves, just like a bubble. Bubble can be extremely thin. This reduces the amount of energy required hugely. And if you look at a lot of papers out there, you guys can look on your own. Humanly traversable wormholes. Juan Maldacena is one of my favorites because he has this theory of ER equals EPR, that Einstein-Rosen bridge wormhole is equivalent to Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen, which is quantum entanglement, and that there's like that's the connection theoretically. He says that, well, the only thing we need for this to work is we need negative energy. Well, if that ether is real, you just solved your only problem that we need. And now we can make a very thin shell. But you could also imagine that it's kind of like surfing, where, yes, you can do some pretty cool stuff, but like all it takes is a slight breeze to knock you over, and then you fall down. And how do we do that? So the other thing I want to point out is there's two different effects going on, both in the videos and I think from a scientific perspective. You've got the warp technology that we've been talking about here, is creating this warp bubble, displacing yourself from space-time entirely. And now when you've displaced yourself, actually your mass becomes zero. And if you look at the equations, when your mass becomes zero, you don't even need a lot of energy to push yourself anymore. Now you can just give it a slight push, and now you're over there instantly. And then the other side of it as well, though, is this idea of like impulse drive. So in Star Trek, they also have impulse drive in addition to warp drive. The point of impulse drive is to go short distances, not very vast distances, but you still are floating freely. Just recently, Charles Bueller came out and said that they have EM drive, electromagnetic drive, that uses microwaves, and it essentially is just producing thrust with like essentially no energy input whatsoever. And this, in my mind, is impulse drive as well. So the way you disrupt that, though, is that you shoot radar at it. Actually, a lot of this technology comes from radar, which I thought was very weird. I didn't know that, especially this idea of phase conjugation with your electromagnetic waves and canceling them out. And now you produce this scalar potential that can be potentially transmitted using a scalar beam. If you shoot that up at your UFOs, you're basically just knocking them off tilt. You're like hitting their grabbing their steering wheel. And this is why like a lot of people think, well, if they have this technology, they would be invincible. But there's always a weakness. Even Superman has kryptonite. And it seems like radar just can knock down UFOs potentially, which is...
And Stephen Greer talks about that technology specifically, right? Like Stephen Greer is a really interesting one because he's been in the space for so long and so sort of consistent about what he said. But a lot of people have fired on him for all sorts of reasons, called him a plant, called him just a kook, whatever. And a lot of the kooky stuff is because he has had his own sort of like ET encounters, so to speak. And a lot of it is through remote viewing style interactions. And he promotes a remote viewing sort of program by which humans can learn to sort of remotely communicate with potential extraterrestrial entities. which when you read the Kona Blue documents, you start to go, that's kind of corroborative. But he also talks about scalar technology as a weapon system that's basically been designed to shoot down UFOs. And then he also talks about Lockheed Martin a lot, which we'll get into more in a little bit. So I'm
Yeah, he
curious,
had.
do you have an opinion of Stephen Greer at all? What's your take
Yeah.
on him?
Yeah. So, and one thing too that I would say is that I don't think that I think that the people that are potentially pushing disinformation, they're just being fed information and then they're kind of being used that way. I would guess the CIA and there's probably like different factions and it's not all good or all bad, what have you. Everybody's got their own motivations, but I think that they use the community against one another, where it's like you just throw the Discord out there and you let the people fight. And as long as they're fighting, they're not focused on the technology that's out there. My opinion of Dr. Stephen Greer is that he's opened himself up to criticism by, having people come out and do these trips out to the desert where he goes and does the CE5 stuff and digs into a lot of the esoteric stuff, talks about Ambassador Bijou from the Andromeda Galaxy, because it's like, it's even hard for me to wrap my brain around all that stuff. But the technology wise, he seems on it. I don't know if that's because he's got the right whistleblowers. He actually talked to Thomas Bearden before Thomas Bearden passed away a couple of years ago, who I think will probably go down in history as a legend and pioneer. So from the technological aspect, I think Dr. Stephen Greer's nailed it. And I think he's seen documents as well back in like the Clinton era where he knew this stuff was real. I don't know, how the other stuff comes about. And this is another reason why I kind of avoid some of that. Not only am I very skeptical of it in general with the, CE5, remote viewing, a lot of that stuff, which is hard to get, hard evidence for. But you have to realize too, that if you want to be somebody who wants to disclose this kind of stuff, you have got to have your skeleton. You got to have your affairs in order. Your skeleton's got to be, you got to have no skeletons in your closet. You can't expose yourself to any level of disinformation because they will attack you on every single possible front that's out there. And I've experienced that firsthand. And I think that you'll find with a lot of these UFO disclosure advocates, this is their Achilles heels. They all have something that can be used against them to discredit them.
Yeah. And if they don't have something that can be used against them to discredit them, often something is manufactured to discredit them, like a mental health issue or like a divorce or Bob Lazar. If he's telling the truth, they then erased all of his records of who he was. So it looks like he's crazy. Things like that. It's hard to say.
Yeah. People are doing that against me right now. Honestly, it's like you'll find if you look at a lot of criticisms, you'll see a repeat trend of people trying to say that I have a mental health issue or something like that. Right. Which is, first of all, very disturbing. It's also sick to do that to somebody. And it's pretty clear I've done enough podcasts. I don't have any mental health issues that are out there. Just because something seems impossible, you definitely shouldn't tell somebody that, they must have some kind of issue going on. It seems, but that's what they use, is that's a way where people can just discard the information without addressing it.
Yeah. And to everyone's credit, this is an insanely it's a mind-bending topic, and it requires a huge amount of humility and open-mindedness to even allow it to sort of start rearranging your worldview. Which is why I think it's important to have people that are talking about it on multiple levels, people that are way deep into it for people that want to go there, and maybe they're getting misled in some ways, but at least they're somewhere. People that are kind of moderate and are like I feel like we are in a space where we are willing to entertain a lot of ideas and not throw everything out, but also willing to be skeptical and to look for evidence. And then there's people that are like hard skeptics, but are also still like ready to accept that maybe there's something there. And I think that all those different levels of discussion help different people sort of approach the fact that maybe we need to change our worldview wherever they're comfortable.
Yeah, for me, just so people know, I dealt with a huge amount of ontological shock right away. Like when I started to realize these videos seem to be real, there's way too many weird details in them. It was even to the point where I had to go ask my own parents, is this whole thing like some kind of Truman Show era-esque ruse? Is Ashton Kutcher going to come around the corner and punk me in a second? Because it was so hard for me to believe that all this science could be out there, real, covered up, the technology be covered up, that we could lie to people about taking an airliner. And then the more I looked into it, I went, yep, actually we can, and we could, and we did. And it goes to show that a lot of people are just kind of asleep out there. And that's part of the reason why, too, a lot of people are going to experience ontological shock when they go with this. And they're going to look for, cognitive dissonance takes over and says, this guy can't be right. It's got to be something else. Otherwise, my whole world's a lie. CNN's been lying to me this whole time. Unfortunately, I don't have any good answers for you on that one.
Speaking of the whole world's a lie, and there's this plane that disappeared, now that we've talked about technology a little bit, let's rewind and sort of put the plane story together in a more complete way that's not just the mainstream narrative. And then let's walk that forwards to what potentially Lockheed or the US government, like what do they have maybe, and what's getting used, like why would they do this? And then we'll kind of start speculating a little bit to close things out on a more like big-minded note. But so what we have now is we have a plane that's full of Chinese and was it Malaysian nationals?
Yeah.
That all work for a very important tech company that has to do with some of the most important technology there is today. A lot of us normal humans don't realize just how important semiconductors and superconductors are, but those are critical for technologies we might not even know exist yet, right? So they're all on board this plane, and it looks as though they may potentially be defecting to China with intellectual property and their families for their own safety, so to speak, potentially. And then during that flight, there's some sort of fire event with dangerous cargo that may have been on there in association with them, but may have been on there and not in association with them. It would seem like there's probably some association there, but that's complicated, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Oh, keep going.
so my question in my mind when I'm hearing you lay this out is the fire an attack on that operation? Is the fire a way to ground the plane, a way to stop them from getting to China? If so, is the rerouting, is there some amount of like because the fire happens and that's one event, but then the UFO thing happens and that's a whole other level of event. Like the fire is an understandable like covert op, like ground the plane, scuttle the people away, that's very believable. But the moment that you then scramble unidentified flying objects to go and disappear a plane, it's like, what went wrong? And from what I'm hearing, tell me if I'm mishearing you, but what I'm hearing is that the Western governments are the ones that have the motivation to start the fire, if that is an intentional thing, because they're trying to stop the plane from landing in China, which is where it was headed. Correct?
Yeah, no, definitely. And this is the
theory?
part where there's like, I think, two different paths you can go down. And if you watch my earlier podcast, and this is why I like that I've done so many, so that people can see the evolution of my mindset as the evidence is unfolded, is early on, well, first of all, very early on, I thought this has got to be non-human intelligence because it just seemed impossible. The more I dug into it and realized not only is it possible, we potentially already have this technology and it's not thousands of years more advanced, maybe like 100 years more advanced, but that we're secretly hoarding this. I realized that, okay, well, maybe this is like some kind of rescue attempt. Like this fire happens, these batteries, and we have an hour and 20 minutes. Maybe there's a VIP on board, or maybe we've got to save these guys because they're part of our company, and
there's nowhere to land, and it's the most critical. So we scramble our highest technology, right?
Yeah, maybe they don't land in Penang because the landing gear is damaged from the fire, or that I'm not really 100% sure. It's probably gonna be pilot judgment to some degree there in terms of like why they weren't able to land. But the next thing you're supposed to do is land on your belly, and if you have a tank full of fuel, it's not going to go well. So the next thing after that is supposed to land in the ocean, which is what we see in both videos. They're doing an emergency landing maneuver in the ocean. We have that Mayday call. We have Catherine T's sighting there as well. So maybe that was a rendezvous point where like the United States government was like, hey, come to this location. We've got our Cope Tiger and Cobra Gold exercises going on in the area. We'll do our best to save as many people when you guys hit the water. But the reality is trying to land in the ocean in the middle of the night is not like Hudson River with Sully Sullenberger. This plane's going to rip to shreds and probably everybody's going to die. So people ask too, why is this not an annihilation event? Because you could just let the plane crash and then that's over and done with. This is why you would argue this has to be some kind of either saving them or you're trying to hide this plane is another kind of thought is like, why would you warp a plane from one place to another? So you're trying to hide it, not show people where it's at. Or this idea of a show of force, which Joseph P. Farrell floated on an interview. I think it was March 20th, 2014. He was already on it. He had like everything figured out without even looking at these videos. I listened to that and I was like, whoa, he's talking about there's a new player on the block. Somebody's got a super weapon. Somebody's trying to show the other people don't mess with us. So the other alternative here is that this is espionage and that fire, those batteries are put on the plane, that we ignited those batteries at the specific point where it's between the weak points in the radar to divert the plane back away from China, back to the West, back to that. We might even remote controlled it. There's a lot of people, including Captain Dan Hanley and James McConnell, that talk about this idea of remote uninterruptible autopilot as well. So maybe we even remote controlled it to that location. And then we decided to phase it out as some kind of show of force because maybe we just got tired of China trying to steal our intellectual property. And we definitely didn't want them to steal this technology.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, to me, those are the options. And this is why I like what you talk about, is like, you don't want to be 100% certain. Like, I'm not 100% certain, but right now I'm on the idea that this was a full on plan from the beginning espionage operation. Because a lot of people ask, like, why is the drone there filming? The drone can't catch the plane, so that it has to intercept it. So then you have to say, okay, well, either it was deployed from like Car Nicobar or Port Blair, which are probably close enough to get there, although it's kind of a stretch, or from those exercises, or it was just planned well in advance, like months in advance, and they had it all the assets ready to go in all the right locations. So,
which seems to lend a lot to a show of force narrative, right? Because you would also need to sort of pre-plan putting the combustible material onto the plane as well. That's not a thing that you can just do the day of, probably, on any old flight. So there's a lot of questions still about what happened. But if the videos are real, and we're just going to take it at face value that, like, if real, then what we're seeing is probably warping the plane away, and presumably we're believing that this technology could not just warp the plane to another location, but also warp to change its speed to, like, put it down somewhere safely-ish, maybe, theoretically.
Yeah, and I think that some of the physicists would say, well, you're going to violate the laws of conservation of momentum. And the scientists I've talked to said, yeah, we can violate those laws. But I think this is just my gut feeling, instinct on this one, is that I think that plane came out in the air at the same speed at which it went through this wormhole, so to speak, and almost instantaneously. There is a time dilation capability effect in terms of it's going to show up in the future based on how far it travels. And you could even argue that it's going to flip around the Earth a bunch of times and that it might show up at some point in the future. But there were some islanders that saw the plane, 20 of them. I was reading some comments earlier today, actually. They were talking about, well, who is going to believe some islanders, which is kind of racist in my opinion, because like, these people don't see jumbo jets flying low, and 20 different people see it with the red and white stripe of Malaysian Airlines. It kind of blows me away that people just discount 20 witnesses on an island and 19 other witnesses to corroborate a fire event, that just literally discount all of them.
Well, they're obviously all savages, so like, how could they know anything, right? Like,
it's like, and they don't see jumbo jets, so it's like, they see this jumbo jets, like, what? And on the same day at the same time, so they see it in the early morning hours. So you could argue maybe there's a time dilation effect. Maybe it goes at most, I think, a couple hours to the future. But I think this thing's pretty much showing up instantly. Somewhere over to the west, we looked at that image earlier where you can see, like, when we look at the drone video, it looks like the plane gets pulled back a little bit when when this dark event happens. And we can tell the plane's going to the east based on the coordinates in the bottom left. So that would put it back to the west somewhere, like actually in the Indian Ocean, but near the Maldives. And that's the right location you need it to be based on the recreation of the sightings from those islanders, and also for it to be flying south from where they saw it to Diego Garcia. So that's what I think we're dealing with here, is some kind of show of force of, hey, warping this plane away.
And then it's totally just speculation at this point of what might have happened to the passengers. If they survived, if it was landed safely, then perhaps they are given new identities and scuttled away into witness protection. Perhaps they're still on the island wherever it did land, and they're just, trapped for the rest of their lives. Perhaps, like, I mean, hey, if they're doing this, like, it's still on the table that they could have just killed them or put them away in prison or something like that. Like, I would like to think that's not what happened, but yeah, like, when you start to dig into some of the other allegations and sightings that sort of put this technology in alignment with people running drugs in, like, black budget programs, people running human trafficking in black budget programs, obviously those are all allegedly, but if the type of people that are running these programs are the type of people that profit off of war, they're the type of people that, have done some pretty horrible things in their lives. So we're not necessarily dealing with the best and brightest.
And that's what I struggle with the most, is like, would we really be so evil as to just execute all these people? My buddy Dave from the Alien Addict podcast would say, well, no, they would just give them the special pancakes. Hey, here, or drink this water bottle, and then you just go to sleep, which is pretty dark. But here's another thing that's maybe even darker, is that they could have just died from the lithium-ion battery toxic fumes.
Yep.
Or also, we found that there was, like, in this random blog, we found somebody wrote like a 5-page dissertation about, they were a Boeing whistleblower, and that they were, like, told to cover up this fire test that would have shown that if the plastics had started on fire in one of these Boeing aircrafts, that it was super toxic and they could just kill everybody as well. And like, that would be very
on brand for Boeing.
Really, especially recently. And they were like, don't fly in a Boeing 777, or say your prayers before you get on a Boeing 787. And that like even the executives of Boeing won't get on their own aircraft, and that Delta was smart not to delay their purchase order by like 12 years. And I started looking it up, and like a lot of the stuff he's saying is like on point, especially we got Boeing aircrafts falling apart left and right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, the sad part is, condolences to the family, because this has got to be pretty hard to listen to and accept for sure. We have to remember the human element here.
Very well said.
But I don't think there's a lot of hope for the people, no matter how you look at it. Best case scenario, they became wards of the state, and they have new identities, and they can never talk to the people they knew before, which is, I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. So speaking of, now that we've sort of wrapped the plane narrative up, and I would really like to spend the last segment of this interview sort of looking outwards and upwards at the implications for what might be going on in the world right now. Where might this technology be? Who's in control of it? How might they be using it? And sort of what might disclosure look like over the next, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? And I think a good place to start might be with some clips from yourself and Clayton Morris and Tucker Carlson talking about sort of the darker side of this and what that might imply.
Yeah, Clayton Morris, if you guys haven't watched my Redacted podcast, I think that's probably like the best one I've done to date, although this will probably be up there as well.
No,
and I would love to talk to
real
Tucker
good.
Carlson. I mean, Tucker talks about this stuff a lot, and I want to know what he thinks, and I want to throw some of these ideas like we're about to throw out there to him and bounce them off him, because I feel like he's got connections where people are telling him stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a weird world to live in where Tucker Carlson is on the forefront of the alien disclosure movement, but he just somehow is, because he does have contacts and he is curious and he has a massive audience. And he's an inherently somewhat skeptical person, especially about the sort of esoteric. And so he makes a good ambassador for that space in a way, I think, where he makes it approachable, but also skeptical, but also open-minded. And it's a weird
It'd be
world.
funny if one day you and I were the Tucker Carlson and Clayton Morris of this phenomenon talking about it. People are looking back talking about us like that.
So here is a clip from the very end of your time on the Redacted podcast, where you asked Clayton Morris to elaborate on what he had said with Tucker Carlson prior to
like we saw in those videos when the orbs are converging, to amplify the energy. As Salvatore Pais' high-frequency gravitational wave generator patent says, amplify energy to how you can destroy a planet. Scale it up further so it's extremely dark, which leads to the one question I wanted to ask you is, what do you think the nature of the UFO phenomenon is? I remember you talking with Tucker Carlson and you guys talking, and it still sticks in my head every single day, pretty much, about the idea of this phenomenon being so dark that it's scary to talk to your family about. My family won't even talk to me about this type of stuff. And I think about that technology, and I think that, wow, that's really, really dark. And then I also think about the idea that there could be some type of spiritual aspect to it, or some type of dark reality that we don't want to face.
Yeah, dark demonic reality, dark demonic beings. The information that I've have discussed with individuals and sources, and I think a lot of the darkness that I'm bothered by, I think Tucker as well, and I don't want to speak for him on this, but he's also kind of followed up and talked more about this, sort of the interdimensionality and also the idea of the demonic side of things. But I think he and I are in agreement about the use of some of this technology for really nefarious purposes. Human beings using this technology, there's a lot of ideas that, oh, these are all aliens. No. It's humans using this technology that we got from them, and that we've been using it for really terrible things. That a lot of NGOs have been using it for really terrible things. I'm talking child trafficking, human organ harvesting. And we have firsthand accounts, of course, you know this, of members of the military stumbling across this and actually interacting with this. High-level members of the military involved and have witnessed this as well. Human organ trafficking, the carrying of human beings and moving them using this technology. So you think about using these craft to transport clandestinely children, human beings, body parts, organs for the purposes of harvesting, scientific study, manipulation. We see this absolutely all the time in war zones, and we see this in natural disaster phenomenon. This is where where a lot of people end up going disappearing. We've certainly seen it in Ukraine during the Ukraine war. So that to me is one piece of it that I would say is the stuff I don't really want to talk about with my family.
So obviously, just to kind of frame this, we are moving into far more speculative territory where we're just kind of we can't know the nature of where this technology is and who has it all right now. A lot of what we've been talking about right now up till this point has sort of been based in evidence and extrapolated from that. And we obviously are now moving further from the evidence and just extrapolating further out. But I would really love your take, Ashton, on what Clayton is talking about there is clearly, if true, then what he's referring to is sort of the darkest black program hole that this technology could possibly wind up in, maybe a CIA black program, maybe even beyond the CIA, and it's more of like a private enterprise black budget program that's just sort of private military stuff. In your perspective on what you've seen and heard so far, do you think that this stuff exists in multiple silos and multiple black budget holes? Do you think there's multiple groups that are leveraging this technology? Do you think it's more likely that there's just one group, and that same group would be the ones that interface with MH370? Like, what do you think is the scope of the dispersion of this technology?
Yeah, great question. I think there's probably multiple, would be my guess. There's one thing that I've learned that I can't prove, but that I just know is that there are elites and rich people that know about this type of technology, like over unity and free energy devices, like a generator that, might be the size of a laptop, for example, that, you put in your bunker and you can produce just energy without being plugged in that can power your entire house. And when you think about it like that, you go, wow, how is that possible? Wouldn't they say something? No, because these people are smart enough to know they don't talk about this kind of technology that's out there, both from a profit motive perspective, but also from a perspective of, you might get disappeared if you talk about this technology too much. I think that you've got the sides out there that want the information out because they want a better world for their children, grandchildren. You've got the sides out there that want to keep it hidden, maybe because they get off on it or maybe because they think that it's too dangerous for the world to have. And then you've got the people who are profiting off of it. When I listened to Clayton Morris, like right there in real time, I was thinking about Timothy Alberino, who went down to Peru, into the Amazon, to these kind of villages that are pretty much just disconnected. They don't even have roads that go to them. And they were experiencing what they were calling the face peelers, that were people. It's almost like Green Goblin from the Spider-Man movie, like coming down on like anti-gravitational, like hovercraft, and then trying to abduct people. And that's all I could think about when I was listening to what Clayton Morris was talking about. And you could imagine, like, especially the human organ trafficking, or if you were going to do scientific biological experiments, DNA experiments, stuff with like CRISPR, that's a great place to go and abduct people where no one's ever going to hear them. They don't even have connection to the outside world. So I struggle with a lot of the abduction side of it, in terms of rationalizing that, but certainly within the realm of possibility, I keep an open mind. But to me, the nature of it, like, what does it all boil down to when you look at this? The dark aspect to me is this idea of that our reality is a simulation, or the holographic principle, that we could be a matrix situation. Or if I had to just put money, bet, I would say probably some kind of prison planet scenario where like we are the aliens, like we are the Australia, we were the criminal convicts that were stranded on here and they took away our technology, and that if we reach a certain level of technology, maybe they just come back down and warp in out of everywhere and just shoot us back down to the Stone Age. And maybe that's even happened before. Who knows? Maybe it happened on Mars. Maybe the old civilizations, like whoever built the pyramids and what have you, maybe that's what happened to them as well. That's the stuff that's dark to me.
Yeah, some Anunnaki theories and stuff like that.
That's why that stuff's interesting to me, is like talking to the ancient archaeology stuff, because I think there might be a connection here related to that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you believe those videos are real, what this all leads down to is free energy. That is the basis for it all. Free energy would change our planet, socioeconomically, politically. It would decentralize power away from the government entities towards the people. But it also might be just our absolute destruction. I mean, if you can imagine terrorists, maybe even adversarial nations, or even just two warring countries with access to free energy, how long is our planet really going to last? It's people think, oh, well, we would do that with nukes. No, guys, nukes are child's toys compared to this. Yeah. We are talking about destroying the whole planet, literally the whole planet, with a push of a button. And that's where you start to really rationalize this idea of maybe maybe it is worthwhile to keep this secret. I even struggle with it. I don't want to be responsible for the destruction of the planet. But at the end of the day, what I decided was I talked to a bunch of prominent people in the UFO sphere, like behind the scenes through DMs and what have you. And I asked them that question. I asked Dr. Stephen Greer that question, Robert Salas as well. And they said, well, it's up to us. That's our destiny out there to decide what we do with this technology and if we destroy ourselves or not. And I talked to people like Jake Chansley, who's the shaman from January 6th. He's actually a really cool guy, believe it or not. And he says, well, we have to put laws into place to protect and look for people that are trying to do that kind of stuff. The same way now we do with people who are trying to get like yellow cake uranium and stuff like that, is that we put laws into place. We track those types of supplies that could produce that, which I think that's really forward thinking in terms of how we do that. So that's my view on the whole situation.
Yeah, and that all of that is sort of siloed into the human side of it too. But the inevitable Pandora's box that also has to get opened up is like, if this technology is recovered crash technology, then we have either extraterrestrials that have brought it at some point, maybe still are here, or another version of that theory that's sounding more and more plausible every day is actually civilizations from the ancient past that reached a level of technology that they've either sustained themselves under the ocean, where there's a shitload of UFO sightings, or maybe in Antarctica, or maybe underground, is like, who knows, plausible. But at this point, we're talking about the space-time barrier being broken. And so we could even be, in some theoretical way, talking about someone from the future coming back. And at this point, it's almost like all bets are off and everything is on the table to a certain degree. There might be some stories that are more likely than others, and maybe it's a combination of both. Like, do you have a perspective of which of those three seem most likely, or is it a combination of two or three of them, in your opinion?
Yeah, no, great question, Ian. If you had asked me a year ago before I did this, I'd have thought there's definitely aliens out there and that's what's going on. They're visiting us. And my perspective's changed like completely. Like, first of all, in terms of how much of the stuff out there is ours versus non-human intelligence, I'd say at least 80 or 90% of it is ours. I think that the United States, Russia and China, I think, have this technology. And the strongest evidence for that is that I haven't been silenced yet talking about this. I haven't got any knocks on my doors or phone calls. And that tells me that they're not afraid of our adversaries getting this, because if I was able to figure this out looking at these videos, then China and Russia's best physicists, they've already figured it out years ago. That was 10 years ago these videos dropped. So I think that when we talk about like these drone incursions that you hear in the news, like, you should be thinking about that in terms of advanced drones that like don't show visible propulsion. Because I think that that's what we're dealing with and how we would stop those types of events. With respect to the non-human intelligence situation, if you look, there's like a graph out there of all the different options, and there's so many different options that can be. Yeah. And I'm completely open-minded to it. Personally, for me, this isn't about aliens. Disclosure is not about aliens for me. I think that that's the problem. In my opinion, that's the problem with the UFO community in general, is that it's all about aliens for a lot of these celebrities out there. Is that, and they're all committed to that there must be aliens and what they think the nature of it is, and that this technology must be alien technology. I'm not even convinced it has to be alien technology. You can actually go back to the history and look that this goes all the way at least back to the Philadelphia experiment in 1943 in terms of warping space-time. So I've
potentially back to ancient civilizations, like potentially back thousands of years to someone from before, because every civilization has stories of things flying around and crafts that seem to hover and people that communicate telepathic. It's like not necessarily aliens.
So maybe we dug something up archaeologically and we saw it. Maybe something crashed and we saw it. I like the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, like maybe they're in the water or something like that. We don't really know much about the oceans. Maybe we are them. The future human hypothesis is one that I used to laugh at, thought there's no way. But then I found out about the delayed choice quantum eraser variant of the double slit experiment. And in my opinion, it proves that the future impacts the current, the present. And this gets really weird. My buddy tells me that this is like basically like Tenet is what we've got going on, where like you have things happening in reverse, but they're also happening fast forward and in real time. Or also something like Dark, the TV show, where it's all deterministic, where if you did meet your younger self, you always met your younger self, and you just don't remember it because you didn't recognize yourself when you were a kid, which is also weird to think about. So, and I've been kind of exploring some of that phenomenon, but end of the day, for me, this disclosure is all about the technology. It's all about free energy and getting that to the people. Everything else, I'll leave that to everyone else to kind of figure out. I just want to make sure people know that we can warp space-time, that we potentially have gravity manipulation, that we can create cold fusion, which is a form of overunity, coefficient of performance greater than 1, and that straight up free energy is possible. And all of this is possible because of the ether. Now, I would challenge physicists out there and scientists out there, and I would say, I don't want to say like prove me wrong, but what I will say is I'm extremely confident that this science will check out. And if somebody wants to win a Nobel Prize, go look back at the ether, go rewrite it into the equations, rewrite the conservation of energy, and I think that Nobel Prize is out there waiting for you. So, yeah. With respect to the alien stuff, though, just not sure. Like you said, I think we got to keep an open mind. I think it could be everything. It could be any combination of all of those things. And
I mean,
you know,
a good framing for it, actually, now that what you kind of got me thinking on here is that we don't know one way or the other. But one thing that we do have pretty solid evidence of is that if there are alien species currently involved in some of the sightings, or like involved in some of the 1960s like sightings around nuclear facilities and such, if there are extraterrestrial or non-human species involved in any of this, we have a fair bit of evidence that at least at least a large portion of that is benevolent, or at least non-combative, non-harmful to us in any major, like, if there are alien species that are visiting our planet with technologies that are this far advanced beyond ours, and they haven't wiped us all out yet, and haven't taken over our world and enslaved us and whatever else yet, then actually, like, that's a pretty strong sense of evidence that they're not a threat, or perhaps even see themselves as sort of a paternal or caretaking like role over this stupid ape society that's blowing each other up all the time. And it lends a lot of credence to the concept that actually the human part of this whole thing is a much bigger issue and a much more important one for us to focus on, because the alien side of it is kind of neither here nor there, right?
Yeah, and one thing I want to quickly just slowly backtrack for a second is that Tucker Carlson also floated this idea that nukes might be reverse engineered technology as well with Joe Rogan, which I had never heard anyone float that idea, which I just thought was interesting because I think that there might be a connection between nukes and this kind of unification theory that are out there. But you know, what you just said regarding the nature of the non-human intelligence being benevolent, that's exactly what Dr. Stephen Greer says, is that his conclusion is it must be benevolent because they haven't wiped us out. And with this type of technology, we're just like ants to them. We're bugs. If you think about the 3-body problem. But I would propose another solution, which is and this also comes from the show, The 3-Body Problems, with spoiler alert, is if you look at our civilization, how fast we've been able to advance. John F. Kennedy talks about this in his Moon speech. If you condense down 50,000 years of human history to 50 years, our evolution is exponential. You could almost argue that we're kind of like a singularity of AI in of itself in terms of how fast we're advancing. And that if we were to get access to this hyper advanced technology, that we can figure it out extremely quickly in the blink of an eye with respect to the cosmic time span of the universe. And that kind of makes us a threat. And I'm kind of a nerd. I like anime. There's one anime I can't stop thinking about, which is called Gurren Lagann. And in that anime, we're basically kept suppressed. And once we achieve a certain level of technological advancement where we are going up that curve, all of a sudden the aliens appear out of everywhere, the non-human intelligence. And it's kind of a hive mind AI non-human intelligence. And then they just begin to wipe us out. And then it becomes a battle of us reverse engineering technology to try to keep up with them and battle back. And the reason why they do that, the reason why they never show themselves, is because it's kind of like the Matrix, where it's a cycle of this happening over and over and over and over and over again. And when you look at it from that cycle perspective, there's no way where they can just keep us permanently suppressed. So they just try to keep us at this certain suppression level, and the cycle keeps repeating itself. And that's the part where I'd say, yes, it probably, I do agree with you on the benevolent side, but there are certain theories that would make sense for it to not be benevolent and still be something pretty scary going on.
Yeah, super fair. And obviously it could also be a combination of both. Like, anything's on the table, because a lot of people theorize about how there's multiple species of aliens, and there's also human technology. And so it's just, at this point, we don't know. All we know is what we can see evidence of, and we should start our investigations from there and work outwards. Right. And I think that leads us nicely to our, to talking about some of the players on the scene today, potentially Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. I saw you tweeting about this general that I immediately was like, I've got that general on my spreadsheet, Joseph Dunford. Do you remember the tweet that I'm referring to? What you were saying about Joseph Dunford?
Yeah, I remember. I think I just want to say real quick that I'm not suicidal. I would never harm myself. Real quick,
Yeah.
I get a little bit worried when we start talking about board of directors on Lockheed Martin that are out there. So this was pretty wild because I want to say in like September or early October, there was somebody who was actually on Reddit, and they were like, "Hey, I want to talk to somebody about this information that I have," and they got in touch with someone else who got them in touch with me. And we have this DM conversation, and they're like, "Hey, first thing I just want to ask is like, do you think these videos are real?" And I'm like, "Dude, I'm the guy who's like promoting these videos. Of course, I think they're legit." And then he says, "Okay, well, I'm friends with this nephew of a general, and I had the nephew showed the general, his uncle, the videos, and he didn't laugh at them. And like the way he's saying it to me, he's like, dude, there's something going on here." And I'm like, "Okay, who's the general?" "General Joseph F. Dunford." So then I'm like, okay, I had never heard of him. So I go ahead and I start Googling him. It turns out 2013, 2014, he was the head of the International Security Forces for Afghanistan. And that's like the area very close to where this plane kind of disappeared. I find out, okay, what happened to him after that? Oh, well, he just gets a promotion to the highest ranking military officer in the entire United States, the advisor to the president, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Secretary of Defense from 2015 to 2019. I'm going, whoa, that's a big promotion. So what happens to him after that? I'm afraid to look at that point. Oh, well, he then becomes director or board of directors at Lockheed Martin, especially on this certain branch of it as well, related to like technology or something like that. And
Yeah, what I noticed when I drew that connection when I saw your tweet about him is I knew about him because he's the chairman of the Classified Business and Security Committee, which is a special top secret committee that they have. Like they have the finance committee on boards of directors, they have the hiring committee, so boards kind of separate their jobs, so they each specialize in different things. And Lockheed Martin specifically, more so than many of the other defense contractors, their board is full of generals and like deep military connections. A lot of the other ones are like people that worked at KFC, but like Lockheed Martin does not mess around. And a bunch of it's these 5 guys up here, their top generals are on this special like top secret programs division. And then the rest of their board, all these guys are not.
Yeah, so I reported the MH370 case to the AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, because they're the UFO. They are underneath the DoD and the Pentagon, and I went, well, technically this is pretty anomalous, and they really generally want first-hand accounts, but like I'm like, dude, I've got verifiable evidence. Like you can, and they said they can look into those videos to figure out if that's what the Sivers system looks like or MQ-1C Gray Eagle. I told them the name of the leaker, Edward C. Lynn, who I'm like 100% sure.
Yeah, your work
guy.
on Edward C. Lynn is amazing. Anyone that gets curious about this should definitely dig into the exposure that you did about him potentially being the leaker.
Like it's just he's got to be the guy. But then I also gave them the good general, as the guy said, his name, General Joseph F. Dunford, to look into him as well. Because I mean, if there is somebody that knows about superconductive harmonic orbs, as I call them, this is the guy right there.
Yeah.
Like he's the one, and he's also the guy that put Space Force together for Trump. So there, we found a clip from Trump where Trump is going, and will Joseph Dunford go ahead and take this command of putting together a Space Force? And I'm going, okay, like like this is weird, really weird. How can this guy not be the guy? And what you find out about a lot of these guys too, which is why I think it's very interesting that Flynn is following me, is that they're very smart. Like they know what not to talk about, and they don't bring it up. And I've met several people as well and had kind of like meetings with them or lunches with people that are either interested or are people that might be connected to some of this stuff. And the same thing happens every time, is where they're like, keep your voice down, keep your voice down. We're just like in a public place somewhere, and I'm going, why are they so afraid? Should I be more afraid? Like what is really going on here? And then this is where you start to realize like they are very cognizant of everything that they say in public and everything they tell to other people as well. So people may ask like, how do you keep this secret? Well, it turns out the people that are keeping it secret really don't talk about it because they don't want to get Edward C. Lynn and thrown in prison and have their life destroyed. But also a lot of people don't have any incentive to either. A lot of people are getting paid big money. Like I guarantee that Joseph F. Dunford's getting good money from Lockheed Martin as well, to remain quiet. And then some of them too, just like, they look at like people like us as just peasants, like, compared to the elite class. And they go, I'm part of the elite I'm in the club and nobody else is. So
I
this
mean,
is how
right
it's been
now
possible.
they're on the team that has free energy and like flying spacecrafts and like who knows what laser weapon technology, like whatever other technology they got. So it's like you could either be on that team or you could piss that team off. It's like
Yeah, I don't want to be
kind of an
against that team.
obvious choice.
Yeah. Plus, imagine you're Joseph F. Dunford and your plane starts on fire and the Boeing window comes off the plane or whatever. And you go, hold up, I'm just going to call my
Yeah.
orb people. They're going to orb us out to safety. Like you don't
I'm
mess
gonna
with
call
those
an
people.
Uber.
Yeah. Call my Uber, my orb Uber.
Yeah.
And I hope that if my plane falls apart there, that they orb me somewhere safe to Diego Garcia or whatever. But
Keyword safe.
so scary stuff, man. It's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, and Lockheed Martin I got kind of interested when I saw that connection to him because Lockheed Martin is in the crosshairs of people like Stephen Greer because Lockheed Martin runs Skunk Works and they have been overlapping with the UFO and UAP communities in huge ways for a long time because there are 5 defense contractors. There's Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics, and they don't all seem to be equally involved in this tradecraft, in this side of things. A lot of, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that a lot of the speculation focuses on Lockheed Martin primarily and Raytheon secondarily.
Yeah, and Raytheon, it's like, why was Raytheon in this? They mostly do radar and surveillance equipment. But we found out earlier, radar is not just necessarily a passive device. If you can make scalar weapons using phase conjugation, then this thing becomes a directed energy weapon. And now you look at Raytheon from a whole different light. And you go, whoa, Raytheon is actually like a weapons manufacturer, which is scary. Now, Lockheed Martin, the reason why I pinpointed them right away is the coherent matter wave beam patent, which is a transducer, meaning it can convert one type of energy to another. And when you look at it, it has these little crevices in it. And coherent matter seems to be a consistent theme for how to achieve some of this magical type effects. And this coherent matter wave beam patent is for like a little microchip that's 10 microns across. 10 microns. This is like the size of a bacteria, how small this is. And coherence, either coherent electrons, which is superconductivity essentially, or coherent matter. I don't know exactly how it all plays out because I'm not like a PhD, but I've been learning more and more. And
is that implying quantum entanglement?
A little bit.
So it's
similar effects, macroscopic quantum effects, which is quantum effects on the macroscopic level. That's where whenever you see coherence in a physics paper or anything related to technology, that's what you should be thinking of, this idea of like quantum entanglement. Even electrons, the way they explain superconductivity is through something called Cooper pairs, which is where they claim, at least, we don't really exactly know because we can't see them, but that the electrons pair up and then they begin to form like a wave where now they're just passing through the medium without running into the atoms, which is what causes things to normally heat up. The other thing that's very interesting that people should know is that Jeremy Corbell is another one of these UFO celebrity people. He's been on Joe Rogan multiple times. He cock-blocked me from going on Joe Rogan. So I don't have a lot of love for him in general, but he actually, I got a clip of him because I'm vigilant out there and I'm watching all these people, but clip of him where he says that Commander Fravor, who is the commander who saw the Tic Tac video from the Nimitz in like 2004, that Commander Fravor was approached by the CIA, and the CIA told him that the Tic Tac was Lockheed Martin technology. And Jeremy Corbell was incredulous. He just goes, no, this can't be, because he thinks that it has to be aliens, right? But if you look at it from this perspective, we're looking at it through this advanced technology, you go, maybe it is Lockheed Martin technology. Like maybe the CIA was, for the first time in their life, telling the truth to Commander Fravor out there. And real quick, I think you missed one defense contractor, which would be Bigelow Aerospace.
Oh, yeah, true. Bigelow is interesting.
Yeah, they're also into it because we talked about Skinwalker Ranch and Robert Bigelow.
I'm actually gonna pull up my little Bigelow segment here real quick because he is interesting. Bigelow is, what an interesting story. So this guy, my understanding of him is that he was like a nerd when he was a kid that was really wanted to like research alien spacecrafts and stuff, but he realized like you got to be rich to do that. So he became a banker in order to become super rich, in order to basically found a side pet project that was his like UFO research center with all of his banker money. And then he bought Skinwalker Ranch and founded Bigelow Aerospace, which basically was like a UFO research defense contractor, especially for the US government. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, and I'm not like an expert on Bigelow and his background, but
Yeah.
that's pretty much what I gathered as well. Is he's like a big nerd. He, in my opinion, he definitely knows what's going on with the UFO stuff. I think that a lot of the billionaires out there know. I think Elon Musk might know as well, though. I'm trying to get a beat on him.
Yeah,
I mean,
Elon's an interesting one. His
he, I,
comments about not seeing UFOs in space lately have been interesting. Like,
yeah, he actually commented because the Hodge twins were retweeting me and
yeah,
saying, Elon, what do you think about this? And he didn't even respond to the substance of the argument. He like copy and pasted that thing about not seeing aliens, and I'm going,
yeah,
that's a weird ass response, man. Like he does, like he's a smart guy. Elon's a smart guy, and I respect him. But when people like don't want to talk about this, is where like even Bigelow, like I said, these rich people that know, they know not to talk about it. You know, and so this is the part two where Bigelow is like strikes me as a guy who wants to get the information out there, but he knows the barriers are there in the way,
there
and
are guardrails for
yeah,
sure.
exactly, and how they'll discredit you and what have you. And Elon Musk definitely knows that, because I think you would probably agree that he's been the target for sure of
Oh yeah,
lots of disinformation because he bought Twitter and took away
Yeah.
their number one kind of social media propaganda apparatus from the United States government.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of conspiracy theories about Elon Musk, but I think that for me, the most likely kind of center line that is probably a thread through it all is that he does have genuine beliefs about humankind and about his desires for like the larger outcomes, even if he's being manipulated in other ways or being dishonest in other ways with us. I do think that it's been a long-standing thread throughout his life that he is doing a lot of his actions for what he sees personally as the betterment of humankind. And so to me, that translates to the kind of person that could have a lot of knowledge about these undisclosed alien projects or technology projects and also see the value in not disclosing them for the greater good. He seems like a greater good kind of a person. So I'm not surprised that he might be running some disinformation.
Yeah, we have the
about it.
same we have the same take. And the one thing I want to say too about all of these people is that they also have to look at all the information they get through a specific lens of, am I being given disinformation? And I'm almost certain that a lot of people wonder that about me for sure. Like, is Ashton the guy? Like, he just came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he's got over 100,000 followers and is all over the UFO community talking to everybody. So I can see how people could be skeptical. So what I want to say to them is, no, I'm absolutely not in any way, shape, or form an agent of the government. I don't know if like people are allowed to lie like that, but I've always told the truth, which is why I think that's very hard for people to discredit me, is that I always just be as honest as I can be all the time.
And you do a lot of free form open conversations like this, where it's really, I think that people don't give enough credit to like how hard it is to fake conversationalism when you're in a totally fake identity. And certainly there are like really great agents out there that can do such things, I'm sure. But like, I think that people give the CIA too much credit and don't realize how wildly incompetent many branches of these secret government organizations have been over their history, and how many blunders have been caused by them not being able to do simple tasks, let alone like run some crazy operative that's like running this whole fake life and whole fake story and going on all the podcasts and free forming for hours at a time, and it's like without ever getting caught in a lie. It's like, that's
because you build this web. If you're lying, you build this web of lies. And the problem is you got to remember what lies you told and keep your story straight. And this is part of the reason why I try to go on as many as possible, to realize that like you can watch as my logical process unfolds if you were to look at all those over time. And I'm pretty sure the CIA wouldn't be sitting here trying to expose the United States government with a lot of verifiable evidence, So, but that's the part too. Is I think.
Sorry, I was just going to say, this actually brings me to sort of like the last thing I wanted to kind of wrap up on is like, we've covered a wide range of sort of the current state of UFO disclosure and whatever technology might be happening in here. And now I kind of want to just kind of close on talking about how can people synthesize information in today's like space? Like, how what kind of things should people be looking out for to identify sort of UFO disinformation, Project Blue Book disinformation, so to speak? And what kind of things should people be doing when they see information to try to verify if it's real? Like, what's your process there? And what do you think is like the coming years of, is it going to be a bunch of disinformation thrown at us? Do you think it's actually disclosures happening for real reasons? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's hard. I don't think they'll ever disclose this willfully. I mean, when we look at this technology, it seems like there's been an intentional distraction to focus people away from the technology and the science, which is why that is my focus. I see almost nobody in the UFO community doing that. Everybody's just speculating, telling stories, repackaging all the contents out there, including those gimbal, go fast videos that are out there. Everybody just wants to talk to certain people and hear their stories as opposed to dig into verifiable information and evidence. I think that there's definitely a slow disclosure process in play where they're trying to acclimate people to some of these ideas, which I actually respect, because I think that's the number one issue here. From my investigation, we don't have to find and invent new science. It's already been out there. It's a matter of exposing people to raise their collective conscious to a point where they believe it. And that's what makes me think that some of these people are actually potentially doing that. And that may be why they hate me, because I'm just coming in going, nah, we're just ripping the Band-Aid off. Here you go. Here's the truth. Free energy. You got it. Like, break your minds. This world's a simulation. Maybe we're in a prison planet. But so, yeah, on that front, like, I don't know. And what I would say is that you should trust but verify. You should trust but verify what people are saying. You shouldn't put a lot of stock into stories that are being told out there, and instead look at the evidence. And that's why I've approached the MH370 case, first of all, like a criminal investigation, where you were trying to get the evidence and present the story. Like, use the scientific method. What's your hypothesis? Stack the evidence up, see if that fits. If not, go back to step one, adjust your hypothesis, start over again. Avi Loeb just commented as well on the Big Things podcast with Christian about the videos, and said that the technology of like warp drive is theoretically possible out there. And then he also quoted the Sherlock Holmes quote, which is, once you've taken away the impossible, whatever is left, however improbable, must be the truth. And that's how we look at this as well. So we know the United States government knows what happened to this plane. We know that planes don't just crash in the ocean without leaving debris fields. We found the surveillance apparatus out there. So as hard as some of this stuff is to believe around this technology, that's why I'm so adamant and confident that the stuff we're talking about here today, especially around technology, is real and out there, and corroborated by this rich history of scientists that have come before us that proposed all these ideas in the past. So that's what I would kind of challenge people out there with, is let's move the conversation towards what this technology means for our future. How do we get it out there without destroying ourselves, which is unfortunately, I think, the logical conclusion that I've come to. Like, that could actually be the reason for the Fermi paradox, why, like, when we look up in the sky, we don't see civilizations everywhere, because anybody who achieves this, this is a discovery as well. It's not an invention. Is that when you figure out unification theories and unlock this access, this Pandora's box that you've opened up, and now you get everything that's out there. You don't get to pick and choose in terms of what stuff you want. It's all coming with. So maybe that's the ultimate conclusion. And maybe, like Dr. Stephen Greer says, that the non-human intelligence don't want us to destroy ourselves, and they want us to get to a point where we won't destroy ourselves. I'm not sure.
Yeah, which is inherently up to us as a society, as a collective people, to be better, to do better, be less violent.
Yeah, and here's another beauty thing about this, is that there's so much division, and I'm sure you've seen it out there, and we can see the protests that are happening all over the country right now and happened in the past as well. And when I look at that, what I see is there's people looking for a purpose in this life. And this technology can give people a purpose. Is that we can have this technology, it seems like magic, and we can start to find all the uses for it and find all the ways where we can have green energy. We can make our world better. We can end the homeless crisis and problem. We can make sure that nobody's hungry out there. I mean, there's so many good things that we can do with this. We can become, like Elon Musk wants, a spacefaring civilization that lives on Mars. If you want to live on Mars, I'm not going to go, but if you want to live on Mars, go nuts. And we can do all these types of things. And that, I think, will bring us common purpose. And I think this is why, I'm going to say something somewhat controversial, maybe not, is that I think this is why they killed JFK, is that I think that JFK saw that. I think he wanted that information to be out there. And I think he saw that this would give us a common purpose, the same way we're supposedly going to the moon would give us a common purpose. And that's a threat to the establishment and the authority that's out there.
Yeah, we live in a world of scarcity where when things are scarce, when essentials are scarce, so many things become problems that you have to fight over, be it ideological or be it real. But if you remove scarcity, suddenly decency and kindness is so much more available to everyone all the time, right? Suddenly most of our conflicts actually become superficial and we don't need them anymore.
Agreed,
Cool.
man.
Well, Ashton, thank you so much. This has been very illuminating for me and hopefully illuminating for everybody else. If anyone has not already seen your recent podcast appearances, what are some of the top like 3 podcasts that you've done lately that they should go and check out in order to catch up on all the work you've done around MH370 and the other stuff?
Yeah, well, I think this one's going to be pretty awesome, but definitely the redacted is the best one, where it's not super long. It's like a little bit over an hour, and you can get kind of all the main questions that you would need asked out there. I was on with the Alpha Vets as well with Chris the other day, and we kind of went through a lot of the implications of some of this stuff. And those are probably the best two to see. And then if you and I did a long form with Vetted, Pat from Vetted. He's kind of an up and coming UFO kind of news person out there. We basically did the Joe Rogan interview, and kind of, so that's where, if you want to see like my thought process, off the cuff questions, really deep dive into my psyche regarding it, you can check that stuff out. And then if you want to know about the science, then you should check out my Hard Truths podcast, which I've done my best to try to keep up to date. Specifically, the ones you can check out if you go to my live stream at JustXAshton. Tom Montauk, we talk about the scalar physics and go deep into the equations and everything there. So if you don't believe that's real, look at that. Otherwise, check out my interviews with Salvatore Paez, who's the Navy engineer, has his UFO patents, and Bob Grenier, which is the low energy nuclear reactions. And then my buddy Dave Rossi. I actually did one with Dave and Sal separately, and then one together with both of them. And those, like, if you're not a believer, just watch those interviews and it'll probably flip you.
Yeah. Great. And then obviously people can find you on X as just X Ashton, correct? I'll throw that on the screen for everybody. Is there anything else you want to plug? Any other places where people can find your work or support you in any way?
Just, Twitter and there. Like, the big thing for me is that I don't want to be doing this for money, and I've never asked people for money or anything like that. There's a lot of people out there that are in the UFO community, trying to make money off of people. And I think it's very important to keep the case and the investigation pure in that sense as much as possible. So the best way to support me is just follow me on Twitter, follow me on YouTube, and share the content and try to raise the bar of discourse out there to wake people up.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely done that tonight, man. Thank you so much, Ashton. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ian. Appreciate you, man.
American conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left, this is about right and wrong.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
It actually lifted up, and it could actually turn.
I'm gonna ask you to look away.
Legend has it that Christian Rosenkreuz drew his secret knowledge from the wisdom of the ancient Egyptians.
They estimated 100 yards from the left wing was this 100-foot disc.
You begin to get into this very scary scenario that has to do with the human condition, of the proclivity to accumulate vast amounts of power around a handful of people. And right now, these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
There's so much evidence out there that even if less than 1% is true, that would be enough to collapse the current paradigm and change the whole planet. Our security is at stake.